In this world, there are monsters and players, as well as the famous system windows. Players operate in guilds registered in their countries and complete missions through them. Initially, it was believed that this system existed only on planet Earth, and countries competed against each other to see who was the best. Until one day, a space league was founded, and Earth was included, revealing that this system was intergalactic, and thus humanity was not alone in the universe. However, Earth began to participate in intergalactic competitions mandatorily, which shook the entire earthly government, and many things had to change. Amidst this, we have our protagonist, who is just one among many players, until something unexpected happens, and his life changes completely. Our story begins in New York on Manhattan Island. Due to the onset of a catastrophe, a defense initiative was launched. For a monster known as Behemoth, the harbinger of the apocalypse, is approaching. The monster is enormous, and its presence is terrifying. Even the warriors assigned to defend Earth are afraid to face it. They know that if the threat is not contained, it will be the end of humanity. Upon seeing the monster up close, a team leader tells his team to hold formation. Thus, they advance and attempt to fight the creature. A system known as BattleNet was inaugurated in 2010. Initially, the aim was merely to create sports competitions among the nations of the planet. But everything changed when the Space League was founded in 2022, as a universal battle began and humanity's representatives lost. Currently, the year is 2023. Earth has become a union of only 10 countries due to the previous catastrophe. However, once again, humanity's existence is at risk, for Behemoth is attacking and eliminating all the warriors who confront it. Yet a warrior stronger than the others emerges. He is our protagonist and feels no fear when facing the creature up close. The monster notices his presence. However, the protagonist remains unfazed and charges into the attack. The attack is so impactful that it causes a great tremor in the area, and it even blinds the other warriors nearby. When they manage to see what happened, they realize that the protagonist defeated the monster alone with a single attack. The group leader then asks if this is the so-called power of the martial saint. The protagonist's name is Sung Jae-han, a member of the American Players Guild, and he is currently ranked 7. From the top of a building, a man says that America has once again escaped disaster, and today will be remembered as a historic moment for future generations. This man is Baron Williams. He is the leader of the American Heroes Guild and is currently ranked 1. After this, worried about Jae-han, the so-called saint approaches him, even after being warned not to do so. One of the players says that the monster's energy may still dissipate, but the guild leader says that the saint knows how to take care of herself. However, he himself knows how dangerous this energy is, and for ordinary players, being near a monster's body like this is quite dangerous. But apparently, for the protagonist, the effect is the opposite, as he seems to use the monster's energy source as fuel. The saint's name is Sophia. She is ranked 3 in the guild and becomes concerned upon seeing the protagonist's injured arm, so she uses a regeneration spell to heal him. Sophia warns the protagonist about the risks of using evil energy as a power source. In any case, she tells him to hang on as she is almost done healing him. Again at the top of the building, a guild member catches the attention of his leader, for he notices that the reward for defeating the boss has appeared. Baron Williams then tells everyone to step back, and he steps forward to open the chest. The first players to arrive at the location are not satisfied with this, but they know they cannot do anything about it. The leader says that for the other players, there is only one hope, the First American Guild, and he claims that only those who are guild members will receive the reward for this mission, except for the protagonist. The saint, however, disagrees with this, and argues that Jae-han was important in the fight against the monster, so she asks why he will be left out. Baron Williams says she should already know, but he asserts that Jae-han is not American, so he will receive nothing. He also says that Jae-han can be naturalized, but he is not a true American, and is nothing more than a mere hunting dog. Sophia tries to argue, but the protagonist says that it's all right. For him, it makes no difference, as in his thoughts, he agrees with what Baron Williams said. Jae-han is just a refugee who ran to America after losing his home. He is super powerful, and that's why he was accepted. But he has always suffered discrimination. Even after becoming a rank 7, he was not accepted as a true American. However, what bothers him the most is being the only survivor of his original guild. Looking at his arm, he realizes that he paid a high price for defeating the monster. Then he receives a surprising message from his system. Due to the mission's outcome, the United States was declared the winner, and along with them, China as well. In the case of the other countries, all were declared losers, and humanity lost the relegation match. Soon, there will be another match between them and the orcs to decide humanity's rank against the others. The players are astonished by this. The saint tells the leader that they will need Jae-han's help, for if it weren't for him, the last match would have been disastrous. However, Baron Williams disagrees and says they will handle it on their own. After that, he and some of his team were teleported to a different location. In this, Baron Williams faces someone and says that it has been a while since he last saw him. These are the opposing orcs, and Baron calls him a pig. He sees that on his team, there are 4 Americans and 1 rank 1 Chinese. Baron thinks they can handle these pigs without Jihan. After all, he is on the team, positioning himself as the representative of humanity. He charges into the attack, claiming he will defeat them. However, with just a single blow, Baron is defeated by one of the orcs. Seeing this leaves the rest of the group quite surprised. Not only them, but other humans are also watching as the match is being broadcast live, including the protagonist who sees everything happening on his system's screen. People on Earth become desperate upon seeing that a human player has perished, but things worsen when the orcs defeat the other players all at once. Only the saint remains, pleading for her life. However, the orc, before attacking, thanks humanity, claiming that thanks to their defeat, the orcs will survive. Thus, all of humanity witnesses the defeat of humans against the orcs. But the worst of all is that humanity has been relegated in rank and expelled from the Space League. Now they will be deleted from the system. With that, a black hole appears in the middle of the city and sucks everything around it, including the protagonist who witnesses with his own eyes the end of the planet. People plead to be saved, but it is of no use as humanity has been deleted from the system. However, in the Space League's system, an error alert is issued, claiming that a human has survived. The protagonist realizes that he did not die, and his system states that the divine power within him refuses to be deleted. He knows he escaped death because his life essence protected him. Jihan wonders if this power could not have manifested earlier. However, he receives a message from the system asking if he would like a second chance. He accepts, then a new message alerts him that he will be sent back to the initial period of the League. Shortly after, he wakes up completely disoriented, not knowing what actually happened. He remembers seeing that he would return to the initial period of the League's creation. Stopping to think about it, he recognizes the place he is in. Then he decides to go to the window to take a look. Realizing that he is in South Korea in the year 2020. From the top of the building, he sees people living freely in the streets. Thus, he concludes that he has indeed gone back in time. Jihan decides to check his status window and confirms that he is at the beginning of everything, and his current level is quite low. But since some evils come for good, he sees this as an opportunity to do things differently than before. So he decides that he will change the future precisely to protect the people he loves the most. He knows that unlike before, he is the only one who knows how this game ends, and he will use this to his advantage. Jihan knows that in 2020, Korea was doing well until then. The country had several strong warriors, and among them, one stood out. He was 3rd in the national ranking. His name was Yoon Se-jin, the King of the Sword. He was considered a national treasure, and because of his performance, South Korea remained at the top of Asia. But this did not last long, because he changed his name to Ito Ryuhei and decided to become a Japanese citizen. In July 2020, he joined the new defense force. That day was the most shocking in all of Korea's history in the BattleNet system, and on that same day, the protagonist returned. Jihan knows that after the Sword King left Korea, everything fell into chaos, and he doesn't want to go through all that again. Until then, Korea managed the Asian side of the league and was at the top. However, the country fell in rank after this revelation. This led Korea to the abyss, as there was no one to replace the Sword King. However, Jihan believes that things could have been different if the BattleNet system hadn't been so rigid. Currently, people think that BattleNet is just a game. They still don't know about the Space League, and have no idea that in the future, this becomes a fight for human survival. Because in the future, if the player dies in the game, the same happens in real life, and real monsters will start invading the Earth, just when Korea will be undermanned. The first time the protagonist lived this moment, everyone believed that if the Sword King had remained, Korea could have had a different fate. Because Yoon Se-jin was more than just a good player, he was a national hero, idolized by many. But for the protagonist above that, he was like a brother, who abandoned his family and left. Jihan wonders why his older sister fell in love with a guy like that. However, he wonders if things would have been different if his sister were alive. For the protagonist, it is good to have returned, but his current status is terrible. He thinks this is understandable. After all, during that time he was drowning in alcohol. However, he thinks that having returned is an incredible gift, because anyone at 18 can become a player, but not everyone has the gift. Among the blessed was Jihan, who received the gift of F rank and used it for gambling, predicting the outcomes, and before returning, he never understood the real value of his gift. In any case, his status is terrible, and he has to find a way to improve it, until he remembers the experience potion. Once he accidentally drank one of those potions, believing it was alcohol. He notices in his system that his achievement points are at 100,000 and wonders why that is, because he didn't have that many points before entering the league, and he doesn't understand why such a high number. Soon he concludes that this is due to his recent regression. Upon opening his inventory, he is surprised. He received a gift for being the last survivor of his past life, and his system alerts him that he can use it whenever he wants. So the protagonist decides to use this benefit. With that, he acquires an upgrade coupon and is amazed. However, he notices that he receives something very specific, which he cannot use now since he is at a low level. Through this, he decides to use his points to buy upgrades, and with that, he manages to raise his level a bit. Only that as he levels up, the price increases. He then thinks whether he should continue buying or stop for now, since he might end up spending too many points and not getting what he wants. But thinking that he has already wasted too much time in his life, he decides to speed things up as much as possible. However, upon leveling up once more, his system alerts him about emergency recovery, and he gets scared. However, he realizes that the alert was only about imperfect items that cannot be repaired, and he notes that he was scared for no reason. Now he says that his gambling addiction won't be cured like this. After that, he goes to a special room and uses his fingerprints to enter. There is Yoon Se-jin's gaming room. As he is a family member, he can access the room. This way, he connects to the BattleNet system for the first time in this life and receives his first item, called the Broken Brush of Dongbangsak. But he uses the emergency recovery and manages to restore the item for use. With that, the preparation is complete. His system alerts that the Bronze League of Gangnam will start the tutorial. A 10-second timer is revealed, and Jae-han realizes that the time for this is short. However, the protagonist uses his newly acquired brush on the system window. He thinks this is the reason he silently leveled up in the past, the rare and unique characteristic that emerges when strength, agility, and endurance are combined was martial power. The two characters written with this small brush, from which everyone distanced themselves. They were the starting point for his awakening. With 1 second left on the timer, he manages to edit his status with the brush. After that, he is connected to BattleNet and immediately drops into a survival mission. He needs to survive in a coliseum filled with monsters and other players. The mission will end when only half of the surviving players remain. The protagonist is surprised upon arriving at the coliseum. He quickly checks his system window. He breathes a sigh of relief as he has obtained the martial power he was seeking. Jae-han knows that this is the initial process for maximum power, but until he reaches that potential, he will need to make do with what he has. After that, he catches a glimpse of his past life. He remembers that the first time, he had no compatibility with his brother-in-law's equipment, but now that he does, he wants to make good use of the gear. Next, his system reveals a side quest, asking him to finish first in the tutorial. Jae-han thinks that with his current powers, he can easily achieve that. However, right at the start of the match, he is attacked. The player who attacked him referred to the protagonist as a newbie, but soon after, he realizes that he missed his strike. Jae-han easily blocked the enemy and thinks that things are going as expected. Soon, this adversary will be the first to lose to him in his new life. The protagonist stops and reflects on the guilds, groups that train and manage players. People from all over the world are crazy about BattleNet, and countries are seeking foreign talents to include in their guilds. Due to aggressive investments from famous companies in Korea, both large and small guilds have managed to establish themselves, allowing them to train strong players at the start of the league. The Gangnam Bronze League showcases the promising players from each guild. Before the match begins, one of the participants analyzes the environment. He notices that the level of the Gangnam League is indeed different. His name is Hyuk-kyu, and he thinks he shouldn't despair, as his luck is better than others. He is a member of the Twin Star Guild. This guild is known for having a large number of promising players. Hyuk-kyu considers himself lucky, as he received a gift from his system that granted him agility. In the midst of the game, he looks for his first opponent. He thinks he has already understood the environment, concluding that first he will let the weaker ones fall before acting, because surviving is the most important thing. Besides, rushing into fights could lead to his elimination. Hyuk-kyu notices that most belong to large guilds and have good equipment, even though this is just the Bronze League. Amidst this, he spots someone alone in the Coliseum. He thinks that such a person is in the wrong place, as looking at the protagonist, he believes someone like him cannot be a real participant. In Hyuk-kyu's eyes, the protagonist is just a newbie with a mere athletic build. In this case, he thinks the protagonist is perfect to be his first target. Even without knowing who he is about to face, Hyuk-kyu bets everything on his luck. He decides to attack what he judged to be an easy target. But to his surprise, Jae-han defended himself. Not only that, but he stopped the opponent's sword strike with his bare hands. Hyuk-kyu is shocked by this, as all his expectations have been shattered. With just one move, Jae-han sends him to the ground and says that the opponent must be quite confident to participate in this league with such a weak gift. However, Hyuk-kyu claims that the gift he received is not weak and is extremely offended by this statement. He demands that the protagonist take back his words, but Jae-han refuses. Soon, Hyuk-kyu becomes extremely irritated and thinks that the protagonist is just a conceited person. Then he gets up, thinking that he just needs to increase the speed of his attacks. For his part, Jahan thinks he cannot ignore the speed of his opponent, because he believes his opponent is faster than him. Even so, he manages to dodge the enemy's attacks. Jahan thinks that the reverse effect is serious. It's hard to get used to because he dropped to level 2 when he returned. Instead of being fast like before, he is slow, and it will definitely not be easy to defeat the opponent. If it were his old version who had gone through so many battles, things would be different. However, the movements of his opponent are very simple and obvious. Soon, the protagonist can see each of his movements. Hyuk-kyu decides to intensify his attacks because the protagonist turned his back on him. However, Hyuk-kyu was easily disarmed. He didn't even see how things happened. When he realized it, the protagonist had taken the sword from his hand and used Hyuk-kyu's own weapon against him. When hit directly, Hyuk-kyu loses the game. But before logging off, he promises to take revenge the next time they meet. For his part, the protagonist thinks that this next time may never happen. After defeating his opponent, Jahan earns some points for the victory. He is starting to level up and realizes that if he wants to win, he needs to maintain this pace. However, he notices that the other players are fighting each other and ignoring the monsters. In the BattleNet, monsters exist alongside players. However, monster kills are worth less than player kills. Most people avoid them, but the monsters usually attack the players. Dealing with a horde of monsters, especially orcs, is something only fools do. Nevertheless, the protagonist receives a new side quest to deal with a group of orcs, with a reward of 500 points. Jahan thinks there's no reason to ignore this quest, especially because of the reward. After all, these orcs are just software compared to the real ones. They are nothing. With that, he speeds off towards the enemies. The orcs are even shocked by this. Still, they try to attack together to defeat the human. They throw their axes in the direction of the protagonist. Jahan, who until then was unarmed, grabs some axes to use as weapons, and makes the enemies taste their own poison. The orcs can barely predict his movements. Therefore, Jahan circles around the group, catching them all by surprise and attacking them in droves. He shows no mercy whatsoever, leaving his enemies thoroughly terrified. Even so, Jahan cannot stop now as he has a goal to fulfill. The protagonist attacks all the orcs at once and gives them no chance to react. One of the orcs tries to use a spear against Jahan, but he grabs the enemy's weapon and breaks it as if it were nothing. The orc is left dumbfounded. For his part, the protagonist says that this enemy attack was pathetic. Then Jahan attacks using an axe. However, the orc's weapons are not very durable, and the axe breaks apart. Soon he tells the enemies to bring better weapons next time. Some orcs say that if the human could break their weapons, he could also break them, so they should all attack at once. So they do, and the protagonist gets irritated by the monster's persistence. Jahan stomps the ground with extreme force and causes a great tremor in the ground. After that, he jumps as high as he can and grabs some weapons from the enemies. Then he uses them against the orcs themselves. The protagonist is moving at superhuman speed. His enemies can barely see his movements, and he uses this to his advantage, attacking the orcs with speed and strength. One of the orcs even says that the protagonist doesn't seem like an ordinary human, and compares him to a true monster. However, those were his last words. Sometime after the protagonist deals with all the monsters, he receives some points as a reward. Moreover, he levels up in the middle of the game, something that is not very common, as points are usually calculated after matches. However, he imagines that this is due to his low level, but in any case, leveling up is not a bad thing. He also thinks that if he has to choose only one attribute to evolve, it will definitely be strength, because that is the only attribute that has power, agility, and vitality at the same time. Even if it has the same points as other statistics, it is insane enough to increase his overall ability by at least 2 times. And above all, there is another reason why the strength statistic is special for Jahan. When he reaches 30 points, he will unlock a method to achieve the title of Nameless Master. So he needs to receive this title as quickly as possible. The only problem is that this statistic has a terrible flaw. That is, it does not increase immediately just because he chose it. As soon as he confirms his choice in the system, he wonders if the attribute has increased. Originally, various combat experiences and training were necessary to increase this attribute, but investing points only raises its growth limit, even though he is not sure if that has happened for him. Jahan imagines that if he continues to increase it like this, it won't take long to achieve the result he desires. Amid these thoughts, someone shoots an arrow in his direction and he dodges. On the other side, a duo of players calls the protagonist lucky for having dodged. The girl says that they don't have much time until the match ends, so they need to finish this quickly. Jahan soon realizes that the two are on the same team. The survival map they are on was originally designed for individual matches, but nothing prevents players from forming teams among themselves. He also notes from the logo that the girl carries that she is part of the Turtle Guild, one of the top 10 in Korea. Moreover, the two formed a combination of archer and warrior, allowing them to fight at a distance and in close combat at the same time. Ji-han thinks he should try to survive until the end of the match. However, the fact that this duo is trying to defeat him means they see him as a weak opponent. Meanwhile, the warrior tries to convince the archer to go on a date with him if they win this match. The protagonist checks his system and sees that he has only 4 kills. Even so, he is at the top of the match ranking, so he decides that it doesn't hurt to stay on top. For her part, the archer tells the warrior that there is a significant age difference between them, and he should keep that in mind. But in her moment of distraction, she was hit and didn't even see from where. For the protagonist, this is just a test of power, as he has just reached level 6. After seeing his teammate defeated so easily, the warrior is extremely surprised, but before he had time to react, the protagonist hits him from behind. However, despite feeling the blow, the warrior says that the greatest advantage of the Turtle Guild is the quality of their armor, and a mere sword won't be able to pierce him. Thus, Ji-han delivers several strikes in succession to the same spot, until he manages to create an opening in the opponent's armor. Ji-han says he doesn't care how strong his opponent's armor is and asserts that he will have to humiliate him. Far from there, a woman watches the protagonist's match. Her name is Lee Hae-yeon, the head of HR for the Reason Guild, and she is surprised by what she sees. Her bodyguard, named Lim Gae-young, asks what she is referring to. She says it's a relief that a player like this hasn't been summoned alongside her bodyguard. Otherwise, there would be a chance for Gae-young to be eliminated or end up in second place. Soon, she asks if it wouldn't be better for her to avoid the next match, if there is a chance of the two being placed together. But Hae-yeon says she was just thinking out loud and that there is no way her bodyguard can lose, claiming that if there were a fight between them, the protagonist would be crushed. Lim Gae-young says she will keep her distance from this player, but her boss orders her to find the protagonist and fight him. Thus, Lim Gae-young has no way to refuse. While watching Ji-han fight, she feels like she has seen him somewhere before. Lim Gae-young, a member of the Twin Stars Guild. She was known for having an S-level talent and was a candidate that the Twin Stars Guild used ambitiously. From the beginning, she met everyone's expectations with her performance and would have been the first in the league, as there was nothing she lacked. However, Sung Ji-han appeared in her path and took the lead in the ranking. The leader of the Turtle Guild team was astonished, as he couldn't believe that a low-level newcomer without any equipment defeated experienced players. He doesn't know how this happened and imagines that Ji-han must be hiding something. Back at his home, the protagonist receives a reward from his system for being first in the tutorial mission. Ji-han thinks the task was quite easy, especially since he already has a huge background from his previous life. First of all, he wants to increase his martial power. He notices that due to his results, his system rewarded him with extra points. In this, he thinks about how he will distribute them. His goal is to quickly leave the Bronze League and move to Silver. Soon he realizes that if he continues like this, it won't take long, as he is at an important moment that grants a class to a player without any specific role. There are a total of 4 options: Warrior, Archer, Mage, and Support. In his previous life, he had chosen Warrior, so he has been through this before and thinks that if he chooses Warrior again, things might get much easier. Besides, he has the achievement shop that formed when he returned, allowing him to change classes whenever he wants, as long as he has the necessary points. In this case, he doesn't necessarily need to select Warrior first and can try other classes. After that, his system asks him to select a class, and Ji-han thinks carefully before choosing. Elsewhere, a group of zombies attacks. This is a Bronze League mission, and the players need to defend a fortress, along with the crystals that are at the top of the location. One of the participants is precisely the warrior Lim Gae-young. For her, even being in a game, this scenario is disgusting. Then 2 more players appear. They also do not like this map at all. Gae-young analyzes her mission companions and thinks that the archer is from the L-Key Guild and has good equipment. On the other hand, the mage does not seem to belong to a guild, but his equipment is excellent. However, for her, the most important thing in a map like this is to have good support in the group. Gae-young believes that defense is ultimately a long battle, a war of attrition, and the help of support is very important. However, she did not imagine that the designated support would be none other than Sung Ji-han. 20 minutes earlier, our protagonist received a support request from his system for a mission. He thinks there is only one reason to select support when he is so inadequate that even the system wants to confirm again. Divine Power is a new attribute that is unlocked by selecting the support class. It is one of the elements that must be enhanced to obtain another unique attribute, but increasing it is quite difficult. It is hard to increase it by training it like other attributes. In practice, there is no other way but to invest the remaining attribute points. Ji-han is betting everything on martial power to obtain the unnamed divine arts, as he thinks he cannot waste all the points he has acquired. But he also knows another way, one that most people are unaware of, which he calls the perfect path. Back in the present, Lim Gae-young is still shocked to see that the protagonist will be the group's support. Not only her, but the other players as well, as Ji-han became known as the guy who got lucky in the tutorial mission. The mage draws attention to the protagonist's clothes, claiming that he doesn't even have armor or battle gear, and he argues that he himself did not spend a fortune on his equipment just to look good. For his part, the archer tries to calm the mage, but he is not reassured by just those words. Lim Gae-young gets irritated with all this confusion and thinks that if this is what she has to work with, the mission will be much harder. However, the protagonist decides to put an end to the discussion. He lifts the mage to the edge of the wall and throws him down to the zombies below. The mage screams desperately as he falls. For his part, the protagonist claims that he does not need a chatterbox in the group, because if it's just going to be idle talk, the mage shouldn't even be in the game. Instead of working with a useless team, Ji-han prefers to do everything alone. Sometime later, the protagonist is about to make another throw. However, the mage begs to be spared, claiming that he will do his best during the mission. His name is Kim Joo-hyuk, and there is a reason for this change in behavior. In the Bronze League defense missions, players have a total of 3 lives. However, after the first death, Kim Joo-hyuk resurrected but lost one of his lives. And after facing death with his own eyes for a few seconds, he no longer wants to go through that again. Now he is prostrating at the protagonist's feet, begging for a chance to participate in the mission. He wants to avoid coming in last at all costs, as being eliminated as the last player means a level drop as a penalty, which is obviously a problem. The skills he has dedicated himself to will also disappear, and if the skill does not reach the minimum required level, it will be permanently deleted. The protagonist says that this is a very quick change of attitude, so he demands that the mage demonstrate his skills as he did when he resurrected before. Hut gets more excited and agrees to use his fire again. He claims to be the most useful fire mage in this resource war, and asserts that there is no one else at level 15 capable of manipulating fire besides him. For her part, Gae-young thinks that the mage does not intend to lose such a precious power in a shootout. She thought she had seen this somewhere before, she just didn't know it was Hyuk. At one time, he belonged to the top 10 guilds and was highly sought after, but he failed 4 times in the Silver Advancement battle, because he was always looking for trouble and acting like trash. However, the mage says he has a condition for collaborating. He wants the protagonist to apologize for knocking him down. This way, he will do whatever Ji-han asks. The archer is happy, as he thinks the group is finally understanding each other. However, the protagonist once again grabs the mage and drags him to the edge of the wall, saying that this is his way of apologizing, instead of just letting him go like he did before. The protagonist throws the mage up into the air and hits him like a baseball, throwing him back to the zombies again. Dae-young is startled by this attitude of the protagonist, but he says he wishes the mage would get some sense into his head. And the archer, who thought the group was finally understanding each other, is left speechless by such a sudden action. In any case, the zombies are climbing the wall, and someone attacks them with fire. There is more than one team on this mission, and they are jointly protecting the wall. At this point, the archer says they are short-handed for not having a mage, and asks what they will do now. He blames the protagonist, saying that because of him, the team has been hindered. For his part, the protagonist accesses his system and realizes he has a side quest. Ji-han needs to defeat 1,000 zombies, but he thinks the allotted time is short for the number of enemies. Even so, he cannot ignore the rewards offered. Meanwhile, Gae-young has been judging the protagonist from early on, and thinks he is the worst in many aspects. She believes the protagonist acts as he pleases, and this type of specialization is a support class. Even players who play for fun don't do that. Therefore, she concludes that he is not someone worth recruiting logically. The group's archer shouts at the protagonist, telling him not to ignore him, otherwise he will have to fight alone. Ji-han says he can really do that. This might be possible if he monopolizes the zombies. Gae-young steps forward and says she will attack, so she asks the others to stay back as support. However, the protagonist says he has everything under control and will take care of everything up front. Then he tells her to protect the archer. After that, a monster approaches, and they notice it is a blood zombie. The archer says this zombie is different from the others, as its body is entirely liquid, so physical attacks will be useless. However, the protagonist does not shy away from the fight. With a single attack, he explodes the monster into several pieces. The others are left open-mouthed upon seeing this. Gae-young notices that the protagonist used holy white fire and wonders if he really has access to divine power. Even so, Ji-han attacks all who approach. Several monsters advance toward him, and he explodes them all with extreme ease. The protagonist himself does not know if he will be able to fulfill the mission the system offered, but even so, he wants to try. The protagonist does not take it easy on the enemies, and defeats them while counting the number of zombies, as he has a goal to achieve. Blood zombies, against which physical attacks have no effect. Ji-han knows that if he releases a bit of divine power when they come into his peripheral vision, he will dominate them all at once. Seeing how the protagonist fights, the others realize he is not joking around. The archer is super excited about the way Ji-han fights. Lim Ga-young notices that the protagonist is fighting without unnecessary movements while freely controlling his divine power and admires the level of control he has. Not only that, but she notices that Jae-han has been aiming only for the heads of the enemies from the beginning. Back to the protagonist, he has already defeated some enemies, but has not yet reached the goal of 1,000 kills. However, thanks to his performance, he leveled up. Meanwhile, Jae-han thinks there is another way to achieve his previous divine power. However, this other way is not so easy to obtain, although it is a definitive path. In 2010, when the game started, sacred relics also appeared, which were traded at high prices due to a rumor that they contained hidden secrets. However, 10 years later, nothing was revealed and their value began to decline, especially since the space sacred relics had no merit. There were many people who were unaware of their existence. However, Sophia had her divine powers awakened through one of those relics. Once she explained to the protagonist that a space relic awakened her powers, but it stopped working after the game tutorial. Even so, this was the reason that made her become the saint, for she believed that by keeping the alien sacred relics for a long period of time and praying, she could increase her divine power. The conditions required by each relic are slightly different, and it was difficult to discover this because the stock of alien relics is very small. Upon hearing this, Jae-han concluded that if this were true, it would only be possible during the tutorial, but thanks to the saint, he could monopolize the sacred relics alone. Sophia, however, did not believe it would work that way. These were advanced pieces of information that no one knew. Sophia was one of the only ones who constantly bought alien relics, except for another player. Knowing this, after returning, the protagonist went to the stock of the Sword Palace, and he found several sacred relics there. However, most had already been used and were deactivated. Even so, he knew exactly who was behind this. It was Sung Ji-ah, his sister, the only saint besides Sophia that he knew. Along with her husband Yoon Se-jin, his sister was the best support player and a heroine representing Korea. But now that is just history, as she has passed away. From the sacred relics she left behind, Jae-han found a metal staff. According to the original use of the item, he is using it to smash zombie heads. The staff's level has stopped increasing and no longer has divine power to absorb. Even so, it is great for combat. Ga-young remains amazed by the protagonist and thinks that his ki control level is something unbelievable. The archer catches her attention for a moment, alerting her about the neighboring tower, but he gets distracted and doesn't notice a zombie approaching. Thus, Ga-young acts in defense of her teammate. The protagonist finally sees her fighting and again thinks he has seen this somewhere before. Then he remembers the Plum Blossom sword, concluding that she is Lim Ga-young. In her past life, Ga-young had incredible potential, being able to become the greatest swordswoman in the country. But she had a tragic end. She died at the hands of Yoon Se-jin, but now she is right in front of him, something he never imagined would happen. For her part, Ga-young asks if the protagonist can join the battle, claiming that they can join forces and work together to achieve a higher ranking. The protagonist checks his system and realizes that his team has a high score, but has not yet reached their goal of 1,000 kills. Moreover, the time he has is running out. He thinks that Ga-young can very well handle the battle without his help. Thus, he steps away from the wall and tells Ga-young that she can provide cover. She and the archer are left confused about what just happened, as Jae-han jumped from the top of the wall, heading towards the enemies on the ground. His intention in doing this is to destroy as many enemies as possible in a short period of time. The archer says that the protagonist's performance was great, as they managed to stay at the top of the ranking. However, in Jae-han's view, he only thinks that he did not manage to reach the goal. The game ended before he reached 1,000 kills and sent him back to the top of the tower, thinking that he can try this challenge again when he gets stronger. While the archer celebrates, saying he wishes to team up with them again. Ga-young is shocked to see a player of a lower level than hers causing such destruction, and she even considers the possibility that Jae-han is using some kind of bug to his advantage. For his part, the archer says he will log out first. Meanwhile, the protagonist only thinks about the rewards he will receive, until Ga-young calls his attention. Jae-han has not met her in this life and does not know how Ga-young knows him. She says she has heard of him around. Ga-young thinks that a talent like his is impressive and that they need someone like him in the Twin Star Guild, so she asks for the protagonist's contact, as she wishes to talk to him after the match. However, she thinks about what she just said and soon feels embarrassed because she did not explain her point well. Ga-young tries to clarify herself to the protagonist. Meanwhile, Jae-han notices that she suddenly became embarrassed. Even so, he says he does not have his cell phone number memorized. He also says that the next time they meet, he will inform her of his number. But now he needs to log out of the game. Thus, Ga-young wonders what he meant when he said he did not know his own cell phone number. She even thinks that in a way, she ended up being rejected. At another moment, the protagonist walks through the streets and thinks that he only remembers his American number from his old life, which is why he did not inform it. In that, he tries to remember what his Korean number was at that time. While he daydreams about this, he ends up seeing a billboard with a recruitment advertisement. However, he does not plan to become a member of a guild right now. For him, the most important thing at the moment is the reward from his last mission. He sees that he gained some points and leveled up, which is not so bad, but he thinks that with his current amount of points, he will not be able to buy a divine item. Things are cheaper now that he is in 2020, but he did not know it would still be like this. So he decides to go home and search in his sister's storage. However, upon arriving at the building where he lives, he is startled, for he sees a pair of shoes inside that do not belong to him. Desperate, Jae-han thinks that everyone has something they regret in life, including himself. But the only thing he regrets the most is not being able to protect her. He enters the house and comes face to face with a woman. She says that Jae-han woke up early and left, so he must be drunk again. For his part, he is left speechless, even though he has so much to say to her after such a long time. In the past, his niece Se-ah always took care of the protagonist in difficult moments, claiming that she would always protect him from his greatest danger, alcohol. However, the protagonist was unable to do the same for her. His greatest regret was not having protected the girl when she needed him the most. Back in the present, she asks what is wrong with her uncle, telling him to come inside the house quickly. For his part, Jae-han thinks about the longing he felt for his niece. He had been away from her for so long that upon returning, he forgot that she was alive during that time. The protagonist looks at Yoon Se-ah and thinks that she will turn 18 this year. He asks if the stay on Jeju Island is already over. His niece replies that she doesn't know how, but it ended early for her. When she was born, her mother was always busy with work, and the whole world was watching her father, which is why it was her uncle who took care of her since she was little. For Jae-han, who lost his entire family at a young age, she is his most precious treasure and stands above anyone else. The protagonist asks if she returned because she received a call from her father or something like that. Yoon Se-ah says yes and reveals that her father has fallen in love again. In the call with her father, the girl said that he really went crazy, talking wildly, suddenly speaking of love. However, her father said he wasn't asking for her understanding, and that was all she needed to know. She then understood that her father was abandoning her just like that and was going away. He confirmed it, saying that this was the condition of his new wife. Upon hearing this, the protagonist became extremely furious and thinks that Yoon Se-jin has always been like this. He becomes even more indignant upon discovering that, in addition to being an irresponsible traitor, he threw away his country and daughter just for a woman. His anger increases as Jae-han remembers what happened to his niece and blames her father for it. In any case, Se-ah asks if it was he who broke the family portrait. He says yes but apologizes, claiming he was overwhelmed with anger. The protagonist thinks that in his niece's view, she is the one who just lost her father. Even so, it was her uncle who broke the picture instead of her. However, the girl says it's alright and that there's no reason for her uncle to worry. This surprises the protagonist, but in a way, he remembers that the girl has always been stronger than him in that sense. After her mother died, she had to live with her uncle, and it didn't take long for her father to abandon her. Even so, she is always smiling and worrying more about others than herself. However, the protagonist thinks that things will be different now, for he is more mature than in his previous life, and he tells the girl that she doesn't need to worry about her uncle anymore, since he will be the one to protect her from now on. He also tells the girl not to overexert herself. Yoon Se-ah thanks her uncle for his words, but now she tells him to take a shower because he is all sweaty. Far away, at the Twin Star Guild headquarters, Ga-young notices that her boss is holding back laughter but says she can laugh if she wants. Lee Hae-yeon finds it hilarious that Ga-young asked for the protagonist's number but was rejected, so she says that Jae-han is indeed an interesting guy. For her part, Ga-young says that when someone of the opposite sex approaches another person, they are usually judged by their appearance, and she thinks she doesn't have a chance. After all, she is not as beautiful as her boss, as her clothes and appearance resemble a man. With this, Hae-yeon realizes that her coworker is having problems and doesn't even notice how popular she really is at the firm. She then says that Ga-young will indeed be hated if she continues saying things like that about herself. At another moment, she asks her boss if she really has plans to make Jae-han join the guild. Lee Hae-yeon doesn't say that her priority is to get him into the guild at any cost. Even the superiors are going crazy saying that this should be a success. The stress is driving her crazy, and she also agrees that Jae-han is someone who should be recruited. Next, Hae-yeon sees that a live broadcast has started. Ga-young asks if her boss is still watching the betting streams. Hae-yeon says that actually, this is a strategic analysis broadcast. After that, Ga-young is shocked to see who started the live stream. The protagonist is on the other side of the screen, asking his niece to help him with the live stream. Ga-young is stunned to see that her boss follows the protagonist. Hae-yeon says that this is not important right now, because Jae-han is publicly claiming to be the brother-in-law of the Sword King. On the rooftop of the building where he lives, The protagonist asks Seiya to step back a little. Then he stomps on the ground, which causes a huge crash in the area. There's a statue of swords in honor of Yoon Se-jin, and for that same reason, he is publicly destroying the monument, because this is his declaration about the change of nationality of the Sword King. In this world, there is a live streaming platform linked to the BattleNet system called Battle2, which is mainly used for game marketing. Through this, players stream their matches, and as they become famous, they also earn rewards within the game itself. And in one fell swoop, the protagonist became the most famous streamer and also earned several rewards for the numbers he gathered in his live stream. As expected, this was definitely effective in grabbing attention, and Jae-han thinks that his niece can help out occasionally with the live streams, but he is surprised to see a black logo in the comments, made from the statue of the twin swords, a cult disguised as a fan club of the Sword King. They supported Yoon Se-jin like no one else, but their resentment and anger only worsened over time, and these emotions ended up being directed at Seiya. Ironically, she was the only person with blood ties, but due to the cult's persecution, she ended up dying. However, the protagonist wants to do things differently this time and claims that if they need someone to channel their resentment and anger, then he will gladly offer himself for the role. After that, the protagonist says that Ida Ryuhei will not return to South Korea. Not only that, but he also reveals that he has an unedited recording, which is about the call Ryuhei had with his daughter immediately after becoming naturalized as Japanese. Thus, the protagonist plays the call during the live stream and exposes to everyone what Seiya's father said to her. Obviously, this causes a shock among the people, but for the protagonist, this is somewhat of a relief, not just for him, but for his niece as well. Then Yoon Se-ah formally introduces herself in the live stream as the daughter of the Sword King. She says that she was also shocked when she spoke to her father for the last time, but she has something to say about it. Her father left behind the Palace of the Sword and said that his daughter could keep the building. However, she claims that she cannot accept the inheritance of someone who threw his own homeland and family away. So she decided to donate the building to her nation and hopes that this donation will contribute to the development of new Korean players. 30 minutes earlier, Seiya was shocked when her uncle suggested donating the building, and she thought he was drunk, as only then would he consider donating his own house. Moreover, she claimed that by doing this, she would give up a great fortune. Jae-han wasn't sure if he could convince her, as he asked her to donate a building that most people wouldn't be able to touch, even after working their whole lives. But he remembers that after Yoon Se-jin became the representative of Japan, the people's anger grew, and the government confiscated all his belongings. And Seiya, having nowhere to go, couldn't resist the persecution and terror from the Sword King's clans, and ultimately chose to log out of the server called Life. The protagonist thinks that if he is going to lose the building anyway, he prefers to do so while protecting their reputations and ensuring that Seiya is safe. Jae-han knows that to his niece, he is just an unemployed drunk, and he cannot reveal to her that he came from the future, so he needs to think of something that would convince her. However, before he can argue, the girl agrees to donate the building. Surprised by her sudden acceptance, the protagonist asks if she is really okay with this, because a minute ago, she was reluctant about this idea. Seiya claims that her uncle is not the type of person who acts without thinking and wouldn't ask for something like this if he didn't have a plan. Besides, it has been a while since she saw him so confident. Back in the present, the protagonist thinks that his niece is truly amazing and wonders whom she takes after. Then, Jae-han notices that the Sword King's fan club is spewing hate towards him and feels happy, as it means his niece is out of their sights. But to ensure Seiya's safety, he needs to do one more thing, so the protagonist steps in front of the camera. He says that he honestly liked how things ended, and although the Sword King claimed that the reason for his departure was because of a woman, he should be aware that people wouldn't believe that story, as the truth is that Yoon Se-jin is just a relic of the past. He also says that Yoon Se-jin only chose to flee to Japan because he was no longer the strongest warrior in Korea and decided to go to a place where he could maintain that status. His strong statement leaves Lee Ha-yeon and her bodyguard speechless. Back to the protagonist, he tells Ida Ryuhei to enjoy life in Japan while he can, as soon he will meet him in person to destroy him. After the bombastic declaration, Seiya asks her uncle if he really needed to go that far. She says that people from Japan and Korea are declaring themselves on social media, but Jae-han tells his niece not to pay attention to that. By the way, Seiya says that her uncle seems different, as the aura around him appears distant from the uncle she knew. The protagonist thinks this is due to his regression, but he can't tell her that. Anyway, someone rings their doorbell. Seiya gets startled and asks who it could be. Jae-han says he didn't expect them to be so quick, and Seiya then asks if he is expecting visitors. Her uncle tells her not to worry and that he will take care of it. Meanwhile, in his new home in Tokyo, Ida Ryuhei sees the news about the recent events and realizes the conflict that was caused by his departure. His wife wakes up to the noise, and he apologizes. She tells her husband not to worry, but ends up calling him by his Korean name. Then he tells Shizuru, his wife, not to call him by his old name, as he is now Ida Riwei. However, Shizuru says he is wrong and asserts that her husband is Yoon Se-jin, the top-ranked Korean player and also the famous Sword King. She states that this fact will never change. Even so, she continues to love him, and she will never stop recognizing him for who he is. The protagonist opens the door and welcomes the visitor. In turn, a man apologizes for arriving unannounced. Jaehan says he was already expecting him, as he knew that sooner or later someone from the government would knock on his door. This man is named Park Yoon-sik. He is the government representative from Korea within the BattleNet system. As the representative enters, the protagonist thinks that the administration has stopped visiting them since Yoon Se-jin left. But this man cared for him and for Seo as much as he could. So Jae-han concludes that he will start investigating to gather everything he needs. Sometime later, Park explains that the Sword King's departure is final and there is nothing that can be done, but the match between Japan and Korea is about to happen. The protagonist knows that Park is dodging the point and imagines that he is there to convince him not to donate the building they live in. He claims that the reason would be that by doing so, the government would be publicly acknowledging that the Sword King will not return, and that would look bad. Park thinks that the protagonist hit the nail on the head and wonders if this is the same Jae-han he knows, because he remembered a man in a deplorable state who was ruining his life through alcohol, but now stands before someone different. In any case, Park says that the government has not completely given up on the return of the Sword King and would like to make a proposal in the form of a consignment management. Jae-han knows that this means the responsibility of managing the Sword King's property would be passed to someone else. He then asks if he will have to return the property as soon as the Sword King returns. Park replies that yes, and says that his wish is for the two of them to continue residing in the Sword Palace. Claiming that this is a victory for both parties, he hands the document to Jae-han, asking him to read it carefully and give a positive response. Jae-han thinks he would hand over the property anyway, but he would appreciate it if the government took care of everything. Then he says he will accept, but he has one condition for that. Sometime later, a player named BJ Golden Light starts a live stream. He is inside the game in the Coliseum. After making a triumphant entrance, BJ formally introduces himself to his viewers. He gets excited, as the game hasn't even started, and he has already received some donations. On the other side, some players are watching him. Fuming with anger, they wish for BJ's downfall, as they believe his fame is disproportionate to his talent. BJ Golden Light is a popular streamer, but not for common reasons. He is known as a notorious troll. Originally, he was promising in the Golden League, but was demoted to bronze level for exploiting underwater content. He plays casually and has fun while doing it, meaning he is just another troll. His equipment is gold level, and it is said that he enjoys massacring and tormenting weaker bronze level players. In turn, DJ talks to his audience and asks them to guess who his first victim of the day will be. But when he looks at the other players, he spots the protagonist and recognizes him as Jae-han. He approaches and tries to interview him, knowing that Jae-han has become quite popular recently. However, in the protagonist's eyes, BJ is just a clown in costume. Thinking it over, Jae-han concludes that there are many BattleTube achievements he still doesn't have, so he should increase his viewers with a stream. As soon as he opens a live stream, BJ gets irritated as he now has competition. He fears losing relevance after all. Jae-han has achieved impressive numbers in recent days. Amid this, BJ notices that the fan club of the Sword King has placed a bounty on anyone who can dethrone the protagonist. Not only that, but the increasing number of points would also make him more relevant on the platform. BJ sees that the bounty for defeating Jae-han is close to reaching 50,000 points and trembles with anxiety. But he panics when he sees that the mission started before he reached the point goal he wanted. Even so, some fan club members promise to donate if he defeats Jae-han. So more than ever, BJ feels motivated to shine again. Thus, as soon as the mission begins, he tries to attack the protagonist from behind, believing that if he wins, he will gain a great reward and visibility. He then advances and attacks Jae-han. The protagonist ends up blocking his strike. BJ doesn't understand how this happened after all. He is using a very good sword. On the other side, Jae-han is using a tuned kitchen rolling pin as a weapon. He says that his opponent attacked him sincerely. Therefore, it wouldn't be polite not to return the favor. Instead of a sword, Jae-han attacks with a chef's knife, and that is enough to take down BJ. Jae-han used only kitchen utensils to fight, and he thinks it has been a while since he last cooked. Sometime later, BJ appears saying that even though he lost, he returned to his followers, having achieved this feat using a magical artifact. Normally, this is not common in the Bronze League, but since he is a player who has been at the top, he has access to this type of item. After returning, BJ claims he was only defeated because Jae-han caught him off guard, but he asserts that this won't happen again. However, the protagonist heard everything, as he was right behind him. Soon BJ was defeated again with a simple strike from his opponent. Jae-han thinks it has been a while since he saw someone use an artifact to resurrect, as in his past life. There were penalties against that. Putting that aside, Jae-han imagined that the current match would be more exciting than usual. He barely sees any audience in the arena, which is strange. But upon looking closer, he sees some elves. The protagonist doesn't like them much, as the elves played a significant role in the destruction of humanity in his past life. He thinks he will have to deal with that later anyway, but first he needs to get rid of what is in front of him now. However, with just one look, his opponents become scared, and they start running in the opposite direction from the protagonist. With that, the protagonist thinks they are making his job easier. Besides, he has only found low-level items to use as weapons. Until then, he gets a bit excited, because his system reveals a side mission: defeat the goblins that have just appeared. However, as soon as the battle begins, the goblins quickly retreat as the protagonist attacks mercilessly. He uses his kitchen utensils to fight against a bunch of goblins, and realizes that this is quite useful, for while he hits them on the head with the club, the knife serves to finish the job. Jae-han thinks it was good to study more about the game. Besides, his intention was to finish this quickly, but he realizes that there is still one enemy left to defeat. In front of him, a goblin champion appears, an arena boss. However, with just one strike, the protagonist knocks him down. Jae-han says that despite being big, this enemy is still just a simple goblin, and he finishes him off. After defeating the monsters, his equipment has worn down a bit, and Jae-han wonders what to do about it. Unlike him, who has already completed his task, the other players are fighting among themselves, and it doesn't seem like they will finish anytime soon. So the protagonist says he will lend them a hand. After all, he is in a hurry to finish fighting. In another place in the city of Seoul, BJ Golden Light is desperate. Out of the game, he analyzes the way the protagonist fights and says that Jae-han is very strong, which could be bad for him and his streams. Jae-han has already defeated about 35 goblins. His numbers are so impressive that a normal player could only achieve the same by switching. But BJ notices that Jae-han has grown tired of the goblins and has moved towards the other players. Not only that, but he is defeating everyone with extreme ease, and his numbers keep increasing, while the protagonist fights against the players. Some try to ally to defeat him. Jae-han realizes what is happening, but in the midst of this, a player fires shots at him. However, with his kitchen stick, the protagonist deflects everything as if he were playing baseball. Those who attacked him are left dumbfounded, and it doesn't take long for them to be defeated as well. For his part, the protagonist realizes that he is leveling up, and the system is rewarding him with divine power points. Then he receives an alert about an epic level side quest, something that is uncommon in the Bronze League, yet the reward is quite interesting. Awakening the interest of the Shadow Queen of the constellation, an absolute being that represents a star and is a divine entity in BattleNet. The interest of such a being would lead to sponsorship, and Jae-han would gain abilities that would normally be unattainable for someone below the Diamond League. He thinks he needs to obtain her at all costs, for if he can catch the attention of one being, the other constellations will surely show interest as well. However, Jae-han wonders if he would be able to find her, for the Queen of Shadows is somewhere among all those elves. After leading the Colosseum, Jae-han achieved 10 kills, an impressive feat as in Korea. It is the first time someone has managed to do this since Yoon Se-jin's departure, and news about it spread across the networks. Jae-han's stream peaked at 4,000 simultaneous viewers, and he gained 10,000 followers in a short period of time. In contrast, the fan club of the Sword King, who cheered against Jae-han, ended up joining him. With this, their hatred was redirected towards Golden Light. BJ did not like this turn of events, but for his part, he became a fan of the protagonist, and decided to help Jae-han by becoming his editor, even without asking for his permission to do so. Sometime later, already at home, the protagonist's niece is astonished. She asks when Jae-han got stronger, for the way he fights against the other players seems like child's play, but the protagonist says that war has always been for someone with a cold heart. Putting that aside, Seiya says that many people want to make donations and asks why he doesn't allow it. He replies that he forgot to enable that option and asks if she has any amount in mind. Seiya says that the amount cannot be left open, as through that, various notifications would appear and distract him during the match. Jae-han then suggests setting a minimum amount of 10,000, but his niece argues that this is too much. However, while Seiya thinks about this, Jae-han can only think about the mission to find and provoke the Queen of Shadows. No matter how much he thinks about it, Jahan cannot find a way to locate the queen in the crowd of elves. Se-ah then says that her uncle has a look that something is wrong. She also says that if he needs her help, he just has to ask. For his part, Jahan thinks that his niece is increasingly resembling her mother, so he decides to check how good Se-ah's skills are. He says he has a mission where he needs to find the Queen of Shadows in the Colosseum. Since he doesn't have much information, he will need help with that. Se-ah then says she can watch the replay of the match to see if she finds anything. But as he steps away, Jahan feels a bit guilty for saying this to his niece. After all, finding the Queen of Shadows is like searching for a needle in a haystack. Anyway, since Se-ah offered to help, he thinks it's good for her to participate. And since he has some extra time, it's time to see what he left on the back burner. Checking his system, he sees that he has a class upgrade space, which he bought using all the points he has saved up until now. This time he chooses the Mage class. As soon as the change is made, Jahan feels the new power coursing through his body, noticing the difference between this power and divine power. The reason he chose Mage instead of support is because of a unique attribute that can only be acquired after having both classes. Testing the power, Jahan feels all of his new strength. Before he regressed, he was sitting near the Baron, listening to his drunken ramblings. When he was drunk, his former boss always opened his heart. But that day, he was saying some rather strange things. His former boss mentioned the day he gained strength and explained that strength is an attribute that appears when magical and divine power unite. This is not something easy to achieve, and he was the only player with 2 classes. Through this, he managed to have 2 system windows simultaneously. This was the rank SS gift that the Baron was so proud of. And even though he was arrogant, the protagonist knew the Baron wasn't lying. The Baron was the only one who had this power before regressing, but now that has changed. For knowing how to achieve it, Jahan managed to replicate the method, even knowing that the Baron himself did not control this ability perfectly. Jahan thinks he needs to have this power to face what is to come. He wants to put all the divine power in his hands to later merge it with the magical power that comes from his heart, but he needs to control it so that the power doesn't escape, as that would cause great damage. Soon after, he celebrates having succeeded, but when the protagonist thought he had everything under control, the power escaped, and an explosion of energy threw him far away. Jahan then realizes that this cannot be controlled just with brute force, and he needs to understand a bit more if he wants to control this power. However, with just one attempt, he was almost exhausted, and now he doesn't even have the power to try again, until he has an idea to store the power. Assuming that it is not possible to store power that has already been released, he thinks that maybe there is a way to store this power inside his body. With that, he decides to test his theory and performs the procedure once more, but this time he tries to store the power within himself. Jahan performs a combination of all his powers for this, but when trying to store this large amount of energy, he collapses. His system tries to integrate the power, but in the meantime, Jahan screams in pain. Soon the system alerts that he has reached an unbearable state for any player. On the other side of the apartment, his niece with headphones on can hear his screams, and with that, she becomes worried about her uncle. Combining the 3 fields of elixir, that is what the protagonist just attempted to do. Wanting to gain strength by combining power and magic, Jahan even used martial power and unconsciously during the combination. However, the conditions for this were extremely demanding, as it was necessary to perfectly control the 3 different powers. Moreover, it was required to have at least attributes above 100 points. If someone far from these conditions attempted such a procedure, it could end quite painfully. Se-ah is startled to hear the screams again, and she runs to her uncle's room. Upon arriving there, she is surprised. Shortly after, the protagonist tells her that he only has a headache, but the girl doesn't understand how such loud screams could come from something so trivial. Jahan says that this is a mystery of the human body, but his niece doesn't believe it. She says she doesn't want to be mad at him. In fact, she claims to have been scared, because she imagined that something bad had happened to him. The protagonist realizes that he did not consider the girl's feelings, but he claims that he is fine and assures her that there is nothing to worry about. He even apologizes for having made her worried. After that, Se-ah punches him in the chest, saying she is relieved that nothing serious happened. And now she says she will continue searching for the Queen of Shadows. After that, Jahan thinks that he can never show his weak side to his niece again. The combination of the 3 fields failed because he lacks experience and level. Even so, it was not a total waste, for Jahan managed to gain the power he wanted. He failed in combining the 3 powers, but successfully combined divine power with magical power, which allowed him to gain strength. However, he realizes that his strength attribute did not increase in his status. His system alerts him that the martial power and strength attributes have integrated and now share points. He sees that now, if he increases one attribute, the other also increases, and he thinks this is too unfair. Ji-han imagines how strong he will become when he combines the 3 elixir fields, but he needs to set that aside for now, as he almost died on the first attempt. He decides to try using mage power since he now possesses that class. However, he still does not have enough power for that, and he realizes he will have to level up. The next morning, he wakes up to his system saying that his divine power has increased, and he can only absorb power from C-rank relics or higher. The protagonist slept next to some relics and tried to absorb their power during sleep. However, those items are no longer useful, and he realizes he wasted points buying them, so he thinks it's better to sell them in the used market. Ji-han decides to check if his niece has woken up, but upon finding her, he realizes that the girl hasn't even slept yet. Seiya says she was researching so much that she didn't notice the time until the sun came up. However, her uncle says she doesn't need to work so hard. She agrees but says she found something good. The girl says there are people with appraisal skills who make materials from other races. The protagonist doesn't like that very much. In any case, his niece shows the replay of her last match. Seiya points out the 2 elves in the image and says they seem to be of high rank. But one of them is a dark elf, and the title of queen or something like that fits the description, so she might be the person her uncle is looking for. Ji-han thinks that makes sense and praises Seiya's work, but the girl says it's too early to come to a conclusion. Deep down, he agrees, as he knows a celestial wouldn't be discovered so easily. Seiya says she will continue investigating other videos and will even edit some for her uncle. The protagonist is surprised to learn that Seiya knows how to edit. The girl says that although she is not very good, she learned by editing her father's videos as a hobby. This surprises him to some extent, as the more he thinks about what Yoon Se-jin did, the more evident it becomes how foolish he was to abandon his daughter. 2 days earlier, Park Yoon-sik told them he had a hunch about who the new wife of the Sword King was, and he said it was Ito Shizuru, the owner of the SSS rank gift known as Beauty. Park Yoon-sik says that the most accepted theory among the administration staff is that the Sword King may have fallen in love with her ability. He told the protagonist to be careful too, as this woman's power surpasses mental control and can even reshape minds. Similar cases in the past reveal that prosperous people left Korea out of nowhere and went to Japan, so anyone is subject to being the next target. After that, the protagonist researched everything he could about Ito Shizuru and her powers. However, he found no relevant information and imagines that the Japanese government is covering everything up. He has nothing he can do at the moment except follow Park Yoon-sik's advice and be cautious, because if what Park said is true, the enemy may already be making their next moves. As the protagonist had predicted, shortly after, a Japanese self-defense force plane lands in South Korea. Sometime later, Seiya hurries her uncle because they have an appointment. The protagonist says he is ready, and they can now go welcome the guest. As they descend in the elevator, Ji-han notices his niece's nervousness. Seiya says this is the first time she is appearing in public since her father left the country. Ji-han says they need to maintain the same confidence as in the last interview. After all, it wasn't them who did anything wrong. With those words, Seiya feels more comfortable. Upon arriving on the ground floor of the building, the protagonist says that most of those present already have in mind what they should hear. Next, they meet with Manager Park, who says he has prepared everything as the protagonist requested. Park mentions that he was confused at first by the request. Previously, the protagonist approached Park to auction off all the items left by the Sword King. But even though he found it strange, Park now understands Ji-han's reasons. He knows that the protagonist's intention is to attract the Japanese to this event. Ji-han confirms this and states that the auction items were carefully selected for that purpose. He prepared the Sword King's BattleNet connector and his battle history, imagining that this would please the Japanese and they would pay a high price for it. And depending on how things unfold, the person in question will have to appear alongside them. Whether it is Yoon Se-jin himself or not, the protagonist says that people will have to accept reality and take the opportunity to move forward. Park listens to the protagonist's plan and thinks that he always seems to be thinking about the future. After that, a commotion occurs at the entrance as some people are being blocked, but they claim to be relatives of Seiya and want to pass. A woman from the group tells Seiya not to hold this auction even if she needs money. She also takes the opportunity to insult the protagonist, claiming that he is using Seiya to sell something that does not belong to him. However, Seiya tells the woman that it was she who used her father's name to pull a scam, so she and the others should not accuse her uncle of anything. She also says that they should not underestimate them, as they are not doing this for money. Seiya claims that they only want to take advantage and grab a part of her father's fortune, but asserts that she is the only heir, and no one can argue against that. With that, Seiya tells the security to remove those people and walks away with her uncle. Ji-han says she was amazing and Seiya thanks him. After that, Park announces that the auction is about to begin. Then the two go to the main hall. Upon seeing the protagonist, the entire press takes pictures of him and starts asking questions. Not only him, but Se-ah is also the center of attention. But instead of paying attention to this, the protagonist discreetly uses his powers to break some cameras and stop the journalists. Ji-han says this is an auction, not a press conference. He then asks for silence to finally start the event. He presents the items, the first being the BattleNet connector that the Sword King used and his battle history. Additionally, the servers contain the Sword King's own analyses about himself, along with data collected from analyses done on the top players in Korea. Some potential buyers get excited about this. Soon, the protagonist realizes that his plan is working, until someone from the audience asks for permission to speak. A man introduces himself as Takeda Kazuo, manager of the recruitment team of Japan's Neo Self-Defense Force. He wants to be the first to make an offer. With that, he bids 5 billion yen for all the auctioned items. Not only that, but he also requests a personal meeting with the Sword King's daughter. The protagonist had anticipated something like this. Nonetheless, he says it will not be possible. He then approaches Takeda and says that if he has any problem, he can voice it in front of everyone. Ji-han also says that among all, the representative from Japan should know this best. Takeda claims to feel intimidated and states that the protagonist should treat his guest better. He also says that if he continues to act this way, his bodyguard will have to intervene. He mentions that the woman known as Shadow is not on the same level as the Sword King, but still, she is a great player and advises Ji-han to be careful with her. However, the protagonist notices something unusual and thinks that this person in front of him looks a lot like Yoon Se-jin. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. The Shadow appeared in front of the protagonist and unsheathed her sword. But Ji-han subdued her. Irritated, the Shadow wanted to fight right there. However, the protagonist interrupted her before that, claiming that she had already given her best and did not need to continue. Because this auction is being broadcast worldwide, and a fight like this would not end well for anyone. Takeda, for his part, says that his bodyguard would not attempt something like that even if she wanted to. He states that the Shadow went too far and apologizes on her behalf. However, before continuing, he has something to say. The manager offers 50 million for the items and for the private meeting. He insists on talking to Yoon Se-ah, claiming that she is the heir and should keep everything. Takeda approaches the girl and asks if she is not interested in knowing how her father is doing. He also says that if she agrees, she can ask anything, but she will also have to answer some questions. In his thoughts, Takeda believes that his proposal is irresistible. But to his surprise, Se-ah refuses without a second thought. Desperate, he tells her to think better and not to give up so much money. Se-ah says that this proposal is very indecent, and if the only way to get news about her father is through a deal, she is not interested. Moreover, she claims to be a minor and that her uncle is responsible for her, so she must do what he says. Takeda did not expect such a direct refusal, but he maintains the cash offer in the name of the defense force and says that the meeting had been arranged outside without her agency's knowledge. However, since she refused, he will just buy the items as that was his order. Not only that, but he says that the order came directly from the Sword King. Takeda hands a letter to the girl, saying that it was her father who wrote it. Se-ah realizes that in the letter, her father introduces himself as Ito Rinhai, his Japanese name, and does not even identify himself as Korean anymore. Meanwhile, Takeda celebrates, claiming that the auction ended before it even started, since the Koreans do not even have money to cover his offer. The protagonist does not like hearing this at all. He remembers that in his past life, the United States government banned Takeda from entering their country. Because Takeda made recruiting players from other countries very easy, being called by people a Japanese calamity. Ji-han thinks that there is a chance Takeda is related to the new wife of the Sword King, so he must be careful. However, he feels that the auction ended very quickly, as if the result had been rigged. Soon, if it continues like this, public opinion will turn against him unless a twist happens. For her part, Se-ah steps up to the podium and reads the letter she received. The Sword King wrote that as soon as he learned she was going to donate the Sword Palace, he was disappointed, claiming that this is a bad idea, because this was the last inheritance he would give along with the purchase of the items. But he states that after this, their relationship as father and daughter is over forever. Therefore, Se-ah should not expect anything more from him. After finishing reading, Se-ah says that this is her father's handwriting, and there is no way the letter can be fake. With that, the protagonist thinks that the new wife of the Sword King really has power over him, and besides controlling him, she also rewrites his mind. Although he never liked Yoon Se-jin, the protagonist knows he was a good father to Se-ah, but now he has thrown all of that away. For her part, Se-ah tears the letter in front of everyone. She asks Akita to inform Mr. Ito that she received the message, and she will gladly cut ties with him. After that, Se-ah says she just realized that the torn letter will be a hassle for the cleaning staff, but her uncle tells her not to worry about it, because he will clean everything in her place. With that, the protagonist picks up the torn letter with his powers and incinerates it in front of all the guests. This is the first time he manifests these powers publicly, which leaves those present quite shocked. But Takeda sees the potential in the protagonist and thinks that he is someone his organization needs to get their hands on. However, he is not the only one thinking this, as all the guild representatives present try to convince the protagonist to become an affiliate. While he tries to distance himself from all the sudden approaches, Seiya calls for her uncle. He tells her to go home first, and he will follow as soon as he resolves things. However, Seiya says that is not it. She feels a strong headache and then falls to the ground, leaving the protagonist extremely worried. Ji-han tries to keep the girl awake and tells her to hold on, as he will call an ambulance. However, Seiya approaches her uncle and reveals that she is just acting. She decided to do this to take the focus of the audience off him. The protagonist feels much more relieved and once again thinks that Seiya is just like her mother. After that, Ji-han says he will have to end the event to take care of his niece, and leads her to the elevator. Meanwhile, Takeda apologizes if his presence caused this. Even so, he insists on giving his card and asks if he can speak with the protagonist at a more opportune time. However, Ji-han takes the card with his powers and destroys it just like he did with the letter, claiming that this is his response. This did not leave Takeda shaken. On the contrary, as his desire to have him on his team only increased, because Takeda knows that the protagonist's power is extremely powerful, and even being a mere bronze, he is a rising star worth investing in, and he wants Ji-han no matter what happens. Back to the protagonist, he praises his niece's acting skills, claiming that she fell right into the story, until Ji-han receives a notification from the system. He sees that it is a donation of 10,000 points, which occurred while the live was off, but finds this very strange and even thinks about blocking the donor. But in the midst of this, the two are approached again. A woman asks for permission to introduce herself and says she is Lee Hae-yeon, the director of the 3rd RP division of the Twin Stars Guild. She apologizes for appearing uninvited, but claims she really wanted to meet them. The protagonist realizes that this voice is familiar, but he does not remember having seen this woman before. In any case, Lee Hae-yeon says she used her good connections with people who work in the Korean BattleNet administration to enter the event. Besides, she is very famous in her guild for having numerous contacts. With this shameless talk and excessive confidence, the protagonist remembers having met her before. While Lee Hae-yeon claims to be a big fan of his, the protagonist is startled when he remembers where he knows her from. Even Seiya notices this and wonders why her uncle is so shocked. She then concludes that this reaction is because the woman in front of him is very beautiful. For his part, Ji-han says that when the world is filled with possibilities, it is very difficult to set them aside. He says this is a quote from Dostoevsky, a great novelist known for being addicted to gambling. Angrily, he asks if Lee Hae-yeon likes this quote. Realizing the danger, Lim Gae-young protects her boss. After that, she asks how the protagonist knows Miss Lee's motto. She also mentions that a small number of people know that her boss is addicted to gambling, so someone who saw her for the first time shouldn't know this. However, this was everything the protagonist wanted to know. With this, he confirmed that Lee Hae-yeon and his first American manager are the same person. She was the other Korean besides him who became addicted to alcohol and gambling. But with her gift called Nurture, she managed to become the master of the Reserve Team Guild. With this gift, she was able to increase the attributes and gifts of her allies and became famous. But she always wore a mask and was known only as Zero. Lim Gae-young continues to confront the protagonist, but her boss asks her to stop. For his part, the protagonist says he met Miss Lee in one of his first lives, as she sent that situation in the chat. So he said this to make sure they were the same person and apologizes if he scared her. Lim Gae-young asks her boss if this is true. Embarrassed, Lee says it's not very nice to be known for being addicted to gambling, but she doesn't think their meeting is so bad. In fact, she says she doesn't know why, but she has the feeling that they have met several times before. After that, she says her guild wants Ji-han as an affiliate and asks for his contact to arrange an appropriate meeting. In Seiya's mind, who doesn't know the whole background of the story, this is just flirting between adults, and she gets excited that her uncle has managed to get a date. Meanwhile, Lee thinks she was direct and sensual, a perfect balance between personal and professional. Soon, her bodyguard should pay attention and learn a little more about how to control men. But while Lee boasts about her great charm and elegance, the protagonist claims he doesn't remember her number, and therefore cannot provide it. Lee is shocked, as she interprets this as a rejection. Even Seiya is surprised, thinking this is nothing but a lame excuse. However, she starts to think that her uncle is trying to play hard to get, so she decides to help him, claiming she feels dizzy again. Ji-han then says he needs to take his niece home and cannot stay any longer, but he says that if Lee has a business card, he will get in touch later. After that, Seiya thinks she won't have to worry about her uncle's love life anymore. After the two step away from the protagonist, Lee says that Lim Gae-yeon can laugh and doesn't need to hold back. The tables have turned, and now Lee Ha-yeon knows exactly what her bodyguard went through when she was also rejected. In the elevator, Se-ah says she never imagined her uncle would wear her father's clothes. Jae-han mentions that all of his clothes are too short and he couldn't find new ones. Besides, those clothes are still in good condition. Changing the subject, Se-ah says that his strategy from a little while ago is very outdated. She claims that rejecting someone to win them over is out of style. She says that playing hard to get is good sometimes, but pretending not to remember your own phone number was a poor excuse. And it only helped him because she is very good at acting. However, Jae-han claims it wasn't any of that. Astonished, Se-ah then asks if his problem is Alzheimer's or something like that. Sometime later, he returns to the game. Jae-han feels quite tired, as he wore himself out trying to calm his niece down. Se-ah was desperate, thinking she had ruined her uncle's future love life. Jae-han thinks it was a big mistake for his niece to think he was interested in Miss Lee, as he believes no one in their right mind would be with a gambling addict. He thinks his surprise was precisely meeting Zero this way. In his past life, Zero was always gambling. Since they both lost their homeland, they quickly became friends, and during their breaks, they would go out for drinks and often bet on everything. But Jae-han considered Zero to be much more addicted than he was. Once she lost a big bet on soccer and got super angry with the Argentine player Diego Massid, and upon hearing from her friend that she should stop gambling, her anger only grew. At that time, Jae-han wanted to understand why she always lived behind a mask, so Zero said it was to hide the scar she got after making a deal with the devil. Besides both being naturalized in America, there were several other things in common that brought them closer, and the biggest factor of identification between them was guilt and self-hatred, because neither of them managed to protect those who were important in their lives back in Korea. Back in the present, the protagonist returns to the game, noticing that some people are already commenting on his live stream. Most of the comments are about his clothes and also the new weapon. Before buying this sword, Jae-han asked why it was so cheap, but now he realizes the reason is that it is quite heavy and large for an ordinary person to use in combat. However, that is not a problem for him. After demonstrating his new sword, Jae-han notices that his subscriber count has increased and they are asking for some things. He realizes he won't be able to ignore them all, so he communicates with the people watching the live stream and says he noticed their curiosity about his status window, but he says he will reveal it only when he reaches the mark of 200,000 subscribers. However, he mentions that if he loses any match before that, he will reveal his status publicly. With that, Jae-han thinks he will calm his audience for a while. Soon after, some lights approach the sky. As other players enter the game, however, upon seeing who it is, the protagonist is surprised, as he never imagined seeing these three in the same match. One of them is the player BJ Golden Light, who is super happy to meet the protagonist. The other is the wizard from the first time the protagonist fought against the zombies, who was furious with him. And the last one is someone he sees in person for the first time, the most famous Argentine footballer, Diego Massid. This man was the #1 in Argentina before the protagonist returned. However, at this time, Diego Massid is not much of a deal. Amidst this, the protagonist realizes he is the group's support. BJ Golden Light is the warrior and the other player is the wizard. So Diego is acting as the archer. Jae-han remembered the Argentine as a wizard in the past and does not understand his class change in this life. For his part, the wizard is furious with the protagonist and can't even look at him. Since being thrown to the zombies last time, he ended up losing one of his abilities. However, the wizard is surprised as he received a secondary mission request from a member of the Sword King's fan club, asking him to destroy the crystal and prevent Jae-han from taking first place. As soon as the game starts, Diego Massid attacks. As a football player, he uses a ball as a weapon instead of a bow and arrow. His class is archer, and because of that, he asks the protagonist, who is in support, for a buff. The protagonist knows he needs to play his role in the team, but he has never performed a buff due to his lack of attributes. However, since he recently gained a power boost, he decides to give it a try. As a result, not only Diego, but everyone on the team is affected by the buff. Next, the protagonist asks the mage if he will play properly this time. The mage says yes. Then Golden Light asks if the mage is friends with Jae-han. Meanwhile, Jae-han says he will lead the top to them and throws himself towards the enemies. Seeing this, Diego thinks the protagonist is crazy. For his part, the mage doesn't hide his discontent at being on the same team as Jae-han, but he thinks it's better to leave him alone in hopes for the worst to happen to the protagonist. While he falls towards the zombies, Jae-han prepares a fire attack. His magical power increased after he fused and became the Force, so he thinks that if he adds divine power, it will make his attack even stronger. Therefore, a group of zombies will not be able to withstand something like that. Sure enough, the protagonist's plan aligns with what he wanted. Not only that, but he also attacks with his sword, causing significant damage to the ground. From above, his teammates are amazed by his skills. Not only them, but the protagonist's followers are also enjoying it, as they are witnessing everything happening in real time. After that, Jae-han stands in front of Blood Zombie, but instead of attacking, he stands still, because he is testing his new abilities and finds it easy to manipulate the enemies. Jae-han has spatial control and attributes that to true strength. This ability is called Absolute Dominion. Anyone who enters the force field has their movements controlled. Most people are not accustomed to this force, but Jae-han is different from the majority. He was the training partner of Baron, who had terrible control compared to his abilities. After facing Baron countless times, Jae-han ended up understanding how the force worked. Currently, the protagonist has become an absolute being, able to use divine and magical power simultaneously, something that at the bronze level is very rare. With so much power, he thinks that the 1,000 kills he couldn't achieve before will be a perfect challenge now. Jae-han is not only stronger, but also faster. His teammates can barely keep up with his movements. This further increases the curiosity about his system window. However, the mage who had been quiet until now starts to laugh. Golden Light's followers ask him to see what the mage is doing, and by the time he notices, it is too late, because the mage was charging a massive source of magical power, preparing to strike the crystal. From afar, the protagonist realizes what is happening. The mage taunts the protagonist, saying he manipulated people to gain more followers and did the same with his own niece. He even asks what Jae-han did to make his niece so obedient to him. Upon hearing this, the protagonist becomes furious, and even his followers sense that this will not end well. The fan club of the Sword King promised a reward of 50,000 points for the mage to sabotage the protagonist's match. Jae-han didn't take long to realize this. He thinks there are only two reasons for the mage to do this. He was motivated by something or found courage out of nowhere. The protagonist also realizes that the mage intends to sabotage him and then flee. He thinks he can handle being insulted, as it is not the first time, but he asserts that the mage made a mistake by talking about his niece. After returning, the protagonist can't help but remember his past life. The thing he wants to forget the most are the last memories he has of his niece, and now that he has reconnected with Seiya, he has become much more attached to her. Because of the fanatic attack from the Sword King's fan club, Seiya was very scared and quite injured. Jae-han held her in his arms while coming to terms with the fact that he had lost her. Soon, unable to do anything about it, he became furious. Although his niece is fine in the new life, that feeling still lingers in the protagonist's mind, and he wants to protect Seiya no matter what happens. When he gained strength, Jae-han realized something after trying to fuse the 3 elixir fields. Now the protagonist can use the nameless divine art, but his martial power is not that high, and he cannot use this power for long. But at the moment the power of the 3 elixir fields came together in it, Jae-han felt something similar when he used the unnamed divine art. The protagonist notices the enemies approaching. Soon, he increases the electricity in his feet. In that moment, he fries the nearby zombies. Jae-han uses a technique called lightning steps, becoming a living lightning bolt, able to walk in midair. Back to the wizard, he feels very good, as he vented his anger by cursing the protagonist. Golden Light tries to stop him from breaking the crystal, but the wizard hits him with fire and sends him flying. He doesn't want to be interrupted and warns that if they try to stop him again, he will burn them all. With that, Golden Light tries to use his audience to support the protagonist. This makes the wizard quite irritated, and he prepares to attack the crystal. Using all this fire power, the wizard attacks the object, but a ball appears and interrupts his attack. Obviously, it was Diego who did this. The wizard gets angry, but Diego says he always follows his matches to the letter and will go to the end. Moreover, he says that the wizard insulted the player who was carrying the team on his back. Not only that, but also attacked his niece. Therefore, Diego believes that people like the wizard cannot do whatever they want. Soon after, the protagonist himself appears behind the wizard. Golden Light realizes that his audience indeed warned Jae-han about what was happening. For his part, the protagonist faces the wizard and says that apparently, the wizard wants to talk to him a lot. With no more alternatives, the wizard can only try to curse the protagonist a bit more. However, Jae-han stops him before he even begins. He says he would very much like to finish off the wizard right there, but he changed his mind, and he won't let him escape easily. Jae-han says that if he defeats the wizard, he will only have his level reduced, but instead the protagonist wants to teach the opponent a good lesson. The wizard thinks he has nothing more to lose, and a level reduction is nothing. His reward was only to get the protagonist riled up, and that was what he wanted. However, the wizard is about to bitterly regret this, for soon after, the protagonist makes him feel immense pain. However, Jae-han tells the wizard that he is just getting started. The wizard begs the protagonist to stop, as he can no longer bear the intense pain. Seeing this, Golden Light says that Jae-han really knows how to be cruel. However, he says that normally, people use BattleNet connectors to avoid feeling pain, but Diego asks him to look closer. He points out that Jae-han is attacking with one hand and using healing with the other. Golden Light then understands that this is a side effect, a type of game bug. Once the player uses a healing skill alongside a constant damage effect, the connector becomes overloaded and causes the target to feel 100% of the pain. Even so, Golden Light does not know what damage Jae-han is causing to his opponent. For his part, the protagonist is using displacement, a technique that breaks bones and twists muscles. This martial arts technique is known to few. The attacker sends their energy into the opponent's body, destroying them from the inside. The wizard thinks he is using the best BattleNet connector possible, so he shouldn't be feeling so much pain. He feels as if his organs are being crushed, and as if needles are stabbing him from all sides. With that, the wizard says that instead of making him suffer so much, Jae-han should just defeat him already. So the protagonist does, and silences the wizard once and for all. Jae-han thinks the wizard will resurrect at any moment. On the other side, Golden Light thinks it's better not to talk to Jae-han right now. Shortly after, the wizard resurfaces, and the protagonist repeats the same procedure as before. Only this time, the wizard couldn't take it and perished again. But since he still had one more life, he resurrected once more. He tells the protagonist not to come closer and begs not to be attacked again. Jae-han tells the wizard that he shouldn't try to harm someone if he isn't prepared for the consequences. However, before continuing, the protagonist sees a donation notification from his niece. Seo did this in an attempt to stop him, claiming that he has gone too far and may lose followers if he continues. The protagonist thinks that his niece is calmer than he imagined. He wanted to continue, but thinks better of it and stops the process as he believes the wizard has already learned his lesson. But there is something he still needs to know, so he questions the wizard about who encouraged him to do this. Desperate, the wizard reveals that he was a follower of the Sword King who offered him a reward to destroy the crystal. He says he lost his sense with so many donations he received, but now he laments and apologizes. However, the protagonist thinks this is not the work of a normal person, so he imagines there is an organization behind this. Then he tells the wizard to thank Seo, as it was because of her that he stopped attacking him. The wizard thanks him, but soon after, he is thrown back just like the first time he met the protagonist. BJ says that this is how you re-educate a troll. For his part, the protagonist wants to continue fighting the zombies and imagines he would have finished this already if it weren't for the interruption. Then he decides to check his system and sees a notification for an unread message. Upon opening it, he sees that the mission has already been completed and doesn't understand how this happened. With this, he realizes that the lightning speed he activated earlier was so strong that it took care of the remaining zombies, and he was so furious that he didn't notice. Besides, he also didn't control the energy properly, which is why it dissipated and exploded. Soon, he thinks he will have to train more before using this again. BJ says that if the protagonist is going back to battle, he wants to go along. But Jae-han completely ignores him and goes to Diego to thank him for protecting the crystal. Then, a sudden earthquake startles them, because something like this has never happened before in this arena. BJ Golden Light says that something is about to explode, and they need to do something. The protagonist sees something in front of him and gets scared. From the ground, something bizarre emerges. All the players witness the emergence of a giant hand and are greatly impressed. They wonder what this is, as they have never seen anything like it before. The bizarre hand joins the other zombies. Not only that, but it also has a mouth that screams shrilly. The sound attracts more zombies closer. However, the monster devours the approaching zombies, and it becomes even stronger as it feeds. Not only that, but the bizarre creature uses the devoured bodies as mass to create new monsters even more dangerous than the zombies. BJ says that something like this shouldn't appear in the Bronze League, as it is a foe only suitable for higher leagues. For his part, the protagonist observes everything. He notes that the monster created by the hand is a flesh golem, and he knows this is unprecedented in the Bronze League. After that, he receives a notification from the system, alerting that this is an extra mission, where it asks him to eliminate the new enemies. Not only him, but all players on the same map receive this mission. The system informs that the Apostle of Destruction called Black Hand needs to be stopped, along with his flesh golems. It also says they can reduce the strength difference with the blessing of the crystal. BJ Golden Light says that even stronger players have difficulties in missions like this, and he doesn't know if they will be able to face it. The protagonist knows this well and notes that this mission is not one that should be completed. He also noticed that although the difficulty level is above average, the rewards offered follow the same pattern. Therefore, this mission is at least epic level. Golden Light says it will be difficult, so he wants to give his best. But for that, he will get the blessing first and tells the others to do the same. But to his surprise, the protagonist charged into the attack without the crystal buff. Jae-han prepares to face the flesh golem using only his powers. He knows that this enemy is very resilient and can only be defeated if its internal core is destroyed, but the monster's body is not easy to break. The protagonist knows that even for experienced players, this is a complicated challenge, so he asks the others to step back. His teammates are shocked by the protagonist's attitude, as he charged in alone and didn't even use the benefit of the crystal. even for BJ, who has become an admirer of Ji-han. This is a tremendous madness. Still, the protagonist goes into battle. He knows there is a basic technique of the nameless divine arts called Three Talents, which consists of Paradise, Earth, and Man. Paradise represents the sky and a vertical cut. The Earth is the ground, a horizontal cut, and Man represents people, like a piercing strike. Following this, there is a technique that represents the destruction of Mount Tal. Thus, it is this technique that the protagonist uses to attack the flesh golem. The other players are shocked to see this. After all, it's not every day that something like this happens. But for the protagonist, the technique he used may have a grand name. However, it is just a vertical strike. At the moment he swung his sword, BJ felt a complex mix of emotions: fear, despair, expectation, and desire, all at once. This blended together and turned into maximum respect for Ji-han. For Luz Jurata, it is the first time he feels something like this, as until then he imagined the protagonist merely as good live entertainment. But now his emotions towards him are no longer superficial. For BJ, Ji-han will be the one to reach the peak of the players. After defeating the monster, the protagonist returns to his teammates. Despite Luz Jurata's firm determination to offer help to Ji-han, this was not his moment, since for the protagonist it was more interesting to get closer and gain Diego's trust, and with that achievement, he succeeded. Although the protagonist defeated a flesh golem, there was more than one of them in the scene. The other groups were attacked by enemies, and could not defend themselves as Ji-han did. As the protagonist's group was the only one to complete the mission, they will also be the only ones rewarded. For Ji-han, this is great, but there is still something he needs. Soon, he invites Diego to meet outside the game, as he would like to share some important information with him. Ji-han says that it can't be discussed there, so if Diego is interested, they can schedule something later. If it were anyone else, Diego would have refused on the spot. But Ji-han proved to be a very interesting player, and this captivated his curiosity enough to accept the protagonist's invitation. Ji-han then says he will organize a dinner so they can get to know each other better. BJ, on the other hand, is desperate for not being invited. He even offers to give some tips about the live streams, but the protagonist declines. Soon after, he logs out of the game and leaves Luz Jurata talking to himself. Back home, the protagonist checks his rewards in the system. He sees that the 10,000 points received are commensurate with the difficulty of the mission. But on the other hand, the crystal fragment he received is a bit disappointing. This crystal grants divine blessing, something that only holy supports can use. Moreover, it is one of the best buffs, being essential in the higher leagues. However, it can only be used once, which is why Ji-han doesn't like it much. On the other hand, he leveled up and is close to evolving to the Silver League, something he wonders if any player has managed to achieve in such a short time. But the rank of his sword was the only thing that did not evolve, and this surprises him. The system alerts that the sword failed to maintain its internal power, and because of that, it will be destroyed. Ji-han took a while to notice the problem and is now left without his weapon. Not only that, but the explosion of the sword caused a wave of energy around. He knows he needs to contain this energy, but ends up injuring himself in the process, as the shockwave is stronger than he imagined. Nearby, a new neighbor of the protagonist notices the beam of light coming from his apartment. Takeda moved near Ji-han's building. Not only that, but he is the user who had the mage go against him in the last match. Previously, Takeda posed as a member of the Sword King's fan club and offered the reward for the mage to disrupt Ji-han's mission. He did this believing that the mage would have his revenge, and he would have the chance to see the protagonist's status window. Ji-han promised to reveal his status if he lost, so Takeda saw an opportunity to manipulate the results in his favor and use the mage for that. Moreover, he planned everything in advance, including pretending to be an avid fan of the Sword King. Thinking it would be easy, Takeda mocked the Korean people, claiming they are easy to manipulate. And instead of worrying about the Japanese, Ji-han should be concerned about his own people. Takeda's intention was to make Ji-han fail publicly. However, he was surprised by the mage's failure. He thinks it would have been great if it had worked, but now he will have to come up with another plan. And he still blames the mage, claiming he should have broken the crystal when he had the chance, but preferred to provoke Ji-han with insults. Takeda concludes that if it continues like this, someone other than him might end up getting Ji-han. The manager of Japan's self-defense finds himself in a problematic situation. Thanks to his experience, he realized that Ji-han was someone he had to recruit at all costs, but he couldn't convince his superiors. What Takeda needed was the protagonist's system window, so he tried to force him to reveal his status. But since he failed, he thinks he needs to act more professionally next time. In this way, he believes that as soon as he has permission from his superiors, just like the Sword King, Sung Ji-han will be recruited through the special method. Back to the protagonist, he was shaken while trying to contain the explosion. He knows this happened because the sword was not prepared for the technique he used to defeat the golem. Moreover, he himself is evolving very quickly, and his powers are becoming stronger. After that, his niece surprises him by entering his room. Seiya says that when she checked her bank account, she saw the amount of 50 billion. However, seeing her uncle's state, she asks what happened. Jaehan says that his weapon exploded, but now everything is fine. Seiya says that he is not fine at all and needs bandages. She also says that although he has shown more maturity in recent days, he still behaves like a child sometimes. After a while, they go out to eat. Jaehan thinks this is the first decent meal he has had since returning, but he says that even though he enjoys going to restaurants occasionally, he prefers home-cooked food. Seiya does not like to hear this after all. She was the one who took him to an expensive restaurant, so her uncle shouldn't be complaining. The protagonist says that the most important thing is that they are having a meal together. Changing the subject, Seiya says she will return to school. She says she is the student president and does not feel good taking a break. But still, Jaehan asks if taking a week off, as the teacher said, wouldn't be better? In fact, Seiya says that the day she will receive the blessing in the Hall of Gifts is approaching. The protagonist looks at the calendar and sees that his niece's birthday is coming. Even in these terribly difficult times, Seiya has always looked forward to this day because she wanted to receive the blessings from the Hall of Gifts at the academy. In the past, she hoped that the situation would improve after receiving a useful gift, but that hope crumbled immediately, because the gift that Seiya received was rank F. That was the turning point that destroyed Seiya, even though she has been a strong person for so long. Knowing this, the protagonist sees no other alternative but to lower his niece's expectations. For her part, Seiya said she will return the next day. Then Jaehan tells her to use his car to go to school. Seiya says she is not a child anymore and does not need that, but like her uncle, Jaehan says she should listen to him. Soon Seiya says that her uncle has become very responsible lately, and that doesn't suit him. The protagonist starts to laugh at this comment because Seiya always knows how to lighten the mood. The next day, the two prepare to leave, but they are startled when they arrive at the building's garage, because the place that was once full of cars bought by Seiya's father, now it is empty as they were auctioned off and none remain. Seiya says she can take the bus to school. However, the protagonist says that there is still one car left. This car belonged to Seiya's mother, and it probably wasn't sold for that reason. The protagonist gets into the car and looks for the keys. As soon as he starts it, the car emits a lot of smoke. Seiya feels a bit apprehensive, and her uncle asks if she is embarrassed. She says no, she is just worried about something. As soon as they arrive at their destination, a security guard tells the protagonist to get out of the car. Soon Seiya says that this is what she was worried about. The protagonist didn't think he would attract attention by parking in the BattleNet Academy courtyard with such a simple car. But the security guard reprimands him, saying that this is not a place for people like him, as he imagines that someone who parks such a bad car must have gotten the address wrong. However, the protagonist gets out of the car and says he is just accompanying a student to the academy. The security guard does not recognize him, but some people around do. And because of that, they start recording everything and streaming it online. It doesn't take long for the news to hit the internet. With that, Lee Hae-yeon tells her bodyguard that she is going out. Upon seeing the news, she says she needs to go to the BattleNet Academy in Seoul, because she needs to find Jaehan. Lee Hae-yeon did not like how their last meeting ended, and now she wants to confront him face to face. The security guard thinks the protagonist is quite bold, and so he tries to punch him. Seeing this, Seiya becomes worried about her uncle. The gym staff are also concerned. However, Jaehan stopped the assailant's punch before being hit. He used his powers on the security guard and paralyzed him. After that, he subdued the man, and he says that the security guard should set an example for the students at the gym, not encourage them to bully the weaker ones. Seiya quickly goes to her uncle, worried about him, but she ends up being recognized. Her friend Kim Hee-soo sees everything from inside her car, and Seiya says that they haven't seen each other in a while. The girl gets out of the car and asks what Juicy is doing. The security guard apologizes, saying he didn't know she knew these people. Kim Hee-soo asks her friend what happened to her car. Seiya says that her father sold all of his cars and the only one left was this one. Her friend says she was worried about Seiya's absence from the gym. While the two catch up, the protagonist stares at the girl as he didn't know his niece had someone so close to her. However, he thinks that something isn't right about this story. Sometime later, Lee Hae-yeon arrives at the parking lot but doesn't find the protagonist, and she is upset as he was still there about 10 minutes ago. Lee Hae-yeon becomes anxious as she thinks other scouts might reach the protagonist before her, but her bodyguard tries to calm her down. Lim Gae-young says that biting her nails won't help, and that's why she's there to assist. Lee thinks it's good to have Lim Gae-young nearby. In any case, she needs to accomplish her goal. She sees that the protagonist has started a live stream. Therefore, she wants to follow him in real time to see what he will do this time. For his part, Jaehan is already in the game, and by the way, he is crushing his opponents. He is using them as training dummies, and he puts his new skills into practice against the adversaries. Jihan realizes that he is managing to control thunder speed better. However, it's always good to practice a little more. On the other hand, no player wants to face him. Everyone saw the protagonist defeat a flesh golem with a single blow, and that put him on another level. Soon, no Bronze League player wants to challenge him. They see him as a natural disaster that cannot be resolved. After sorting everything out, the protagonist returns home. Not only did he finish in first place again, but he also leveled up, and upon reaching level 15, his system alerts him that he has unlocked a new map. The dungeon mode becomes available starting at level 15. In this mode, besides fighting, the player also needs to escape traps, but it is usually not played alone, as players form teams to tackle this map. However, the protagonist knows that many people are watching him, and if he doesn't choose wisely, his teammates might try to sabotage him again. He thinks he could join a guild temporarily, but if he did that, he wouldn't be easily released by whoever hired him. In that, he imagines that the only way to solve this problem is to create his own guild. That way, he would have total control over everything and the freedom to act as he wished. CA 26. On another day, Jahan prepares breakfast with his niece. Seiya praises the meal, but he says he only prepared the ingredients he had at home, and he promises to make something better next time. By the way, he asks if Seiya will ride with her friend again. Seiya says no, as the last time she felt so uncomfortable that she doesn't want to go through that again. Her friend kept asking about her father and what Seiya's plans for the future are now that she has been abandoned. But besides that, she says she has another reason. Seiya says she prefers her mother's car because she feels more comfortable in it. In a way, the protagonist feels comfortable hearing this. As they approach the gym, the protagonist notices a crowd of reporters. They discovered that his niece studies there and want to interview them. Jihan manages to get in but thinks he can no longer use this car. However, his surprise increases when he sees Lee Haeyeon and her bodyguard. When he gets out of the car, he notices that the two were waiting for him. When questioning Lee Haeyeon, she does not deny that she was there waiting for him. For her part, Seiya says she won't interrupt him this time. Lee Haeyeon asks if this time Jae-han has time to listen to her. The protagonist leaves his niece at the gym and goes out for coffee with Haeyeon. He comments that Lee Haeyeon seems more relaxed than usual. She says this is because she is a former student of this school. Speaking of reactions, she says she doesn't understand what is going on in Jae-han's mind. The protagonist apologizes for not having contacted her, if that is what she is referring to, as he has been quite busy in recent days. Lee Haeyeon says it's alright, but admits that it was the first time she chased after someone, and since she managed to talk to him, she has a proposal to make. Soon, she offers Ji-han a platinum-level contract. The protagonist is surprised and imagines that Lee Haeyeon has prepared well. Next, Lee Haeyeon approaches the protagonist and says that this contract was only possible because of her. After all, she claims to have feelings for Jae-han. In his thoughts, the protagonist thinks that Lee Haeyeon planned this approach so much, but now she is appealing emotionally, which shows desperation on her part. He then wonders if she is really the Zero he knew from his past life. For her part, Lee Haeyeon is not pleased with the protagonist's reaction and thinks he is gradually hurting her pride. She also imagines that Jae-han will come up with another lame excuse when he should just refuse and end it. In any case, she insists and tells Ji-han to check the contract and send it back to her after signing it. With that, Lee Haeyeon asks if he will now provide his contact number, but instead, the protagonist suggests making a bet. He says he has reached level 15 and is about to go to a dungeon. Haeyeon is surprised by this, as she believed the protagonist was acting cautiously, but now he says he is going to a dungeon, which she finds quite risky. However, she asks what the conditions of the bet are. The protagonist says that if he does not achieve first place in the dungeon rank, he will sign with her and also provide his phone number. Lee Haeyeon thinks it is absurd for him to go to a dungeon without a guild or team, especially since many are after him wanting to hire him. Ji-han understands that Lee Haeyeon will not accept the bet, but she says she is just surprised by the offer and asks what happens if she loses. The protagonist says that if Lee Haeyeon loses the bet, she must reveal her status window. He proposes this because he believes she is secretly cultivating. And if Lee Haeyeon's abilities are the same as in his past life, he wants to be aware of that. Ji-han knows that during this period, cultivation is similar to an experience bonus, so it is a gift that causes embarrassment for others to see. Looking at Haeyeon's reaction, it seems she does indeed have such an attribute, but he thinks it is better to confirm with his own eyes. Even feeling embarrassed, Lee Haeyeon agrees to the bet but tells him not to regret it later, and she says that now he needs to connect, so she prepares to leave. However, the protagonist says that won't be necessary and asks the two of them to wait right there, claiming that it won't take long. Soon after, he enters the game and goes straight to the dungeon. This map is the Emperor's Tomb, something that the system itself warns about the difficulties. This map is filled with dangerous monsters and traps, some of which need to be disarmed. But there is another factor that makes this map even more difficult. According to the game rules, all team members must remain alive until the end of the match. That is why having a good team is important, as it ensures victory. Keeping this in mind, the protagonist thinks that this time, the members of his team are not so bad. They are all from the same guild, and their equipment is good enough. The other players are excited to fight alongside Jae-han. The protagonist takes the lead and tells the others to trust him. Even though he thinks it would be better to come up with a strategy first, they decide to just follow the leader. Jae-han feels relieved because this time, apparently, no one is interested in trolling the match, which will be one less concern. So now he can start to act. Next, they encounter the first enemies, the guards of the Imperial Tomb. With that, the group's mage suggests using her magical powers to face them. However, the protagonist says he will take care of it and asks them to just follow him. Jae-han is attacked by one of the stone soldiers, but after dodging, he destroys it with just one punch. Not only that, but he does the same with the adjacent ones, which is quite impressive for his group. After that, he tells the rest of the group not to stray too far. There are 10 passages in this dungeon. All the passages in the dungeon lead to the 7th floor, the final stage. Jae-han's team is taking the lead at a staggering speed, but they know this is thanks to Jae-han, as he is doing everything. He is taking down all the sturdy soldiers as if he were destroying sand statues. For the protagonist, things are not much different from when he was there for the first time. Then he sees a notification from Takeda and wonders what he is planning this time. However, Jae-han thinks he won't go to Japan even if he dies, so he decides to just block Takeda. Meanwhile, his companions are impressed that he cleared 3 floors of the dungeon very quickly, something that would normally take much longer. They thank the protagonist for his work, as if it weren't for him, the whole team would have had more difficulties. For his part, Jae-han thanks his team for not intentionally ruining the game. Next, he reaches the 4th floor and notices that there is a trap ahead. Jae-han thinks this is obvious to the point of being too obvious. Since the walls and floor are pierced, something was bound to come out of there. He asks the group if it's okay to speed up the pace a bit more. The group agrees, so he continues with the mission, and he leaves the rear guard to the group. However, the warrior of the group is planning something. He thinks that as soon as he gets the opportunity, he will have his reward of 1 million points. Takeda is acting again. He didn't like being blocked by the protagonist, so he decided to try to disrupt him again and put a reward on his defeat. Previously, he had said he wouldn't use the same method again, but this is what he can do for now. Soon, he imagines that money solves everything, and with the right amount, everyone is manipulable. With that, Takeda is curious to see how Jae-han will escape this. He says that the moment the protagonist runs, it will be his end. Takeda even celebrates, as he thinks this can't go wrong, unless someone informed Jae-han beforehand, which he believes is not possible. As soon as the protagonist starts to run, the trap is triggered, and several arrows are shot in his direction. He notices this but continues running. Desperately, the mage says she will deflect the arrows with her magic, but the protagonist anticipates and uses the power of spatial domination. With that, he creates a force field, and everything that approaches stops immediately. The mage is impressed and asks if anyone else saw that. The group's archer confirms that yes. However, when she looks back, she sees that the two are trying to log out of the game and end the match. She tries to use her powers to prevent that from happening. However, as fast as lightning, Jae-han shoots. He already hits the 2 deserting players, preventing them from ending the match. As punishment, the protagonist traps them with his power, just like he did the last time someone tried to disrupt the game. The mage approaches and asks if everything is okay. Meanwhile, the 2 deserters realize they were about to do the same thing and were manipulated. The protagonist explains that both received the same mission, so if they had succeeded, the match would end, as everyone must be alive for the entire team to win. The mage feels guilty and apologizes on behalf of her guild. Jae-han tells her she doesn't need to pretend anymore, as he knows she also intended to betray him. He discovered that all the members of the Black Eagle Guild received the same mission and regrets not having noticed this from the beginning. The tip came precisely from BJ, who was watching the live streams of the other players and warned the protagonist in time. The Golden Light started watching the 4 live streams simultaneously, as he knew something like this could happen and wanted to help in some way. He soon realized that a member of the fan club of the Sword King promised to reward players who ended the match on purpose, and before it happened, he alerted Jae-han of the danger. Back to the protagonist, he says that even if they hold a grudge against him, a reward of 1 million points is too much. He believes it should have cost less, even if the players had logged out of the game on purpose. So his conclusion is that the rewarders need to be at the level of a specific guild, or there is a specific group behind this, posing as the Sword King's clan. 1 million in exchange for a mere status window can only be the work of someone who is obsessed with him. Upon hearing this, Takeda begins to tremble, believing he could be discovered at any moment. As for the protagonist, he believes that the curiosity about his window is very high, so he will change his promise. He raises the goal from 200,000 followers to 1 million, and when he reaches that number, he will fulfill his promise to reveal his status. In his thoughts, Jahan was becoming worried because his subscribers might reach 200,000 soon, and he wanted to keep that information a little longer. Now this opportunity fit perfectly, as it would be great to reach 1 million followers. In any case, he needs to complete the mission, so he ties up the other players with him and drags them to the end of the match, not caring at all about them, treating them like mere dead weight. After advancing, they arrive at a statue. One of the players begins to speak. However, a voice warns that he must remain silent, for the Emperor is eternal and must not be disturbed. Soon, several statues begin to appear, repeating the same phrase constantly. After being dragged for quite some time, the players were extremely irritated with the protagonist, but they couldn't even complain as their mouths had been silenced. 10 minutes ago, they had been cursing him freely. The warrior of the group said that if Jahan didn't release them, his guild would pursue him for revenge. However, the protagonist was not intimidated by these threats, claiming that a guild like that, which hires trolls like him, does not inspire fear. In addition to paralyzing them, Jahan also drained the players' energy. Soon, the warrior was astonished to learn that besides everything, Jahan also knew how to use pressure points. This technique is only used by high-level martial artists, so a player from the Bronze League shouldn't know it. At least that's what the warrior believed until that moment. Angry, he tried to insult the protagonist, but had his mouth silenced. Jahan tells him to follow him in silence. Thus, the three were carried to the boss room, and throughout the journey, the protagonist used healing on them. After all, he needed both to stay alive until the end of the match. Although he was carrying the weight of the other players, Jahan had no difficulty advancing. Shortly after, he arrived at the boss room and encountered the statues present there. Not only that, but he saw that enemies were everywhere. Soon, he was surrounded by so many of them. The statues did not remain still and tried to attack. For his part, the protagonist defended himself. At the same time, he pushed the rest of the group away to have space to fight. With the wizard's sword he had picked up, Jahan did not fight empty-handed and took down the enemies as if they were made of paper. But he had a surprise. Upon seeing that a different statue had awakened, he knew it was not just any statue, but the Emperor, the boss of this dungeon. It was at this moment that the voices demanded silence so the Emperor would not be disturbed. But apparently, it was already too late for that. The protagonist's system issued a mission notification, asking him to eliminate the Emperor's guards before facing the boss. Soon, he conjured a shield around the tied-up players, and thought they would be protected enough to give him space to deal with the enemies. Now, in addition to protecting them, he would need to fight against a crowd. Therefore, Jahan conjured a larger force field, this time with absolute territorial strength. Every time he used this ability, he could only think about how overpowered it was. For all the enemies that approached were immediately paralyzed, and with a simple gesture, he could easily destroy them. The protagonist thought it was no wonder the Baron always used this in boss fights. But now he had no time to think about that, as he needed to finish the match. However, without any difficulty, Jahan attacked the enemies that were already paralyzed, destroying them as if they were nothing. Everyone knows that it is only possible to complete this dungeon if everyone in the group remains alive. The Emperor awakens and stands before the players, challenging them. However, the protagonist can only think about the condition of the final stage, the adoration of all the players towards the boss. Jahan carefully analyzes the situation and thinks well before acting. He drags the players as close to the altar as possible, for each one needs to be in their proper positions. After untying their ropes, the protagonist uses his powers to get them on their feet, and thinks he will achieve what he wants. Jahan believes that due to his increase in strength, the area of the barrier he created is much larger than before, and he is happy about it. In any case, the Emperor points his bow at them, and demands that everyone kneel before him. The other players think there's no way to escape this, since the protagonist is forcing them to do everything he wants. After everyone kneels, Jahan does the same. The Emperor is pleased with their behavior. With that, the protagonist's system informs him that he has cleared the entire 7th floor, and it opens the return gate for him to pass through. The other players murmur for not having received the reward, and they believe Jahan has won. However, they wonder why he isn't moving. For his part, the protagonist receives a secondary quest, asking him to demonstrate his true respect for the Emperor without explaining how to do that. But it reveals that the completion reward is 5,000 points along with the Emperor's bow. The points don't catch the protagonist's attention, but the bow does, and now he has become interested in obtaining this reward. The mage wonders why they are still there when they could have already completed the mission. To her surprise, the protagonist pulls her clothes. Ji-han tells the Emperor of the Raiders that he will pay his due respect. After that, he throws the mage in the direction of the Emperor, offering her as a sacrifice. The Emperor accepts the offering, and with that, the mage is eliminated from the match. This catches everyone by surprise, including the other players, and also the chat of Ji-han's live stream. The Emperor asks why the protagonist referred to him as the leader of the Raiders. Ji-han says that a conqueror is nothing more than the Raider of Raiders, and he wants to demonstrate his respect accordingly. He mentions that there are several pieces of gold scattered around. However, the most valuable item for the Emperor is the bow and arrow he possesses. The conqueror's bow has been marked as a reward. Knowing its value, Ji-han thinks that the way to show his true respect is to loot it. For him, this is the clear condition for this hidden quest. Hearing this makes the Emperor laugh. He says he likes Ji-han and considers him someone exceptional who has impressed him greatly. Therefore, the Emperor says he will grant the protagonist his treasure for demonstrating true respect for him. Ji-han prepares for what is to come. The Emperor draws his bow and says he will shoot a phoenix arrow, his true treasure. As the protagonist prepares to fight, the rest of the group begins to feel heat, and it doesn't take long for them to burn with the flames. Even the protagonist is feeling the effects and notices the danger. He knows that if this continues, he won't be able to hold on for much longer. Ji-han no longer cares about the remaining team members. However, at the moment this happens, their weapons will also disappear. And since he is using stolen weapons, he needs to deal with the enemy before that happens. The heat around melts even the Emperor's gold. As a result, the group's archer also perishes. For his part, the protagonist focuses, because he knows that if the Emperor shoots the arrow now, he won't be able to catch it. The only way is to act before that. Ji-han thinks he should aim for the arrow. A long time ago, there was a story about how an immortal appeared in front of a lost person who was wandering around. He said he would lead the way, then warn the person to keep going, pointing the direction. In this way, the protagonist believes that the unlimited tri-talent guides the person. Soon, a more refined high-speed cut should solve his problem. As soon as the Emperor shoots the arrow, the protagonist also makes a shot. This attack is called Trailblazer Immortal, and upon hitting the Emperor's bow with it, Ji-han prevents the enemy from shooting. Irritated, the Emperor asks for the protagonist's name. Seeing that his plan worked, he replies that his name is Sung Ji-han. The Emperor says that Ji-han is a great warrior. He throws his arrow to the protagonist and says that he has proven his strength. Thus, he deserves to keep the phoenix arrow. However, the Emperor says he would like to meet him in the future. Not in a place like this, but rather on a memorable battlefield. Ji-han agrees with this. He believes that since there are many battlefields on the BattleNet, this is indeed possible. After that, he decides to test his new weapon and ends up liking it a lot, besides imagining the possibilities of using it in the future. The protagonist receives a comment saying that his last strike was not visible even in slow motion. Ji-han thinks this makes sense, as he used high speed to attack. This technique aims at a single point using thin swords. He realizes that his control of the nameless divine arts is getting better and better, very different from when he tried to use them for the first time. Because the more he uses the technique, the more refined and stable it becomes. Next, he sees on his system that the mission is over. Not only that, but the warrior was the only survivor of the group. Still on the ground, he mourns for his fallen comrades, but he soon notices the presence of the protagonist, and he begs to be spared, claiming that the true culprit is the person who hired him, not him. However, that doesn't matter to the protagonist, since he only wanted to teach a good lesson to those who tried to harm him. After leaving the game, the protagonist returns to the real world, and he meets Lee Hae-yeon again. He asks if she watched the live stream. Lee Hae-yeon says yes and praises his performance. At this point, the protagonist wants her to fulfill her part of the deal, claiming that she cannot go back on her word. However, Lee Hae-yeon says that him holding a weapon like that makes him appear much more intimidating than usual. In any case, she has no way to escape, and she ends up revealing her status window to Ji-han, but asks him to keep it a secret. Ji-han sees that her ability is welcoming, which allows the user to welcome a player, providing support for others to become stronger. Meanwhile, Lim Gae-young wonders if her boss will be okay, because she knows that her boss is extremely embarrassed to talk about her ability. Plus, she spent a good amount of money and didn't get a worthy ability. Once, Lee commented that the newbies from the Turtle Guild had good abilities, and she was envious of having spent so much money only to end up with a temporary home. That's why she regrets going to the academy. Lim Gae-young thinks that her boss always spoke poorly of the academy and her ability whenever she had the chance, and finds it an irony of fate. For her part, Lee Hae-yeon wonders why Ji-han hasn't said anything until now. Then she sees him smiling and finds his attitude very rude. However, the protagonist says he is not laughing at her, and is just happy. Soon after, he asks for Lee Hae-yeon's contact number. She doesn't understand why, after all, she lost the bet, but the protagonist claims he has no special reason and just wants her number. Irritated, Lee Hae-yeon says that her number was on the business card she gave him last time. However, Jae-han claims he lost the card, which makes Lee Hae-yeon think that he really has no interest in her. But this leaves her very confused, as now Jae-han is asking for her number. Lee thinks that the protagonist only became interested in her after seeing her ability, and believes he is playing with her feelings. Her ego is even more hurt, and the fact that he asks for her number after everything only makes things worse. However, she cannot refuse to give her contact, as she thinks she might gain something from it. Not only that, but she also adds a heart next to her name to try to provoke him. After that, Lee Hae-yeon tells her bodyguard that they are already leaving, but in her mind, she thinks she has hooked the protagonist and sees this as a way to turn the game in her favor. Ji-han says goodbye and mentions that he will get in touch. However, he leaves laughing, breaking all her expectations, and soon Hae-yeon wonders what is wrong with him. Meanwhile, the protagonist's live stream is being discussed by many, including by his niece's friends, who praise the girl's uncle's performance. However, Kim Hee-soo is the only one who apparently doesn't like it much. Another friend of Seiya says that the last time she visited her at home, her uncle was in a deplorable state of alcoholism, but now he is completely different. In a way, Seiya likes to hear this, as it means her uncle has matured. Hee-soo says she almost forgot, but mentions that her friend's 18th birthday is coming up soon. Upon reaching adulthood, people have the right to awaken as players and finally have their system window. The students at the academy are eagerly awaiting this day in their lives. After all, they study for it. At the academy, there is a special room where students undergo the awakening process and discover their abilities. But besides that, Seiya's father is an SS rank player, her mother was an SS rank saint, and there are rumors that her uncle has an S rank ability, so the expectations for her are high. However, Seiya herself says that DNA lineage means nothing when it comes to awakening an ability, so she is managing her expectations. Even so, her friends hope she awakens an ability worthy of her family. Anyway, Seiya is anxious, and her friend reassures her, saying that she will gift her regardless. However, Seiya claims she doesn't need it, but thanks her anyway. Kim Hee-soo laughs at the situation, but inside, her intentions are not so good. The story cuts to Japan, at the headquarters of the country's Neo-Defense Force. The Sword King is undergoing his first training after migrating from his country, and his strength has not diminished at all. On the contrary, his evaluators point out that he has become even stronger, and they are eager to see Ito Ryuhai's first battle, since he will represent Japan in the International BattleNet tournament and will face an opponent from his former country. At the headquarters of her guild, Lee Hae-yeon receives a call. Her father is trying to arrange a marriage for her, but Hae-yeon says he cannot do whatever he wants with her and tries to impose limits, claiming that the choice to marry or not is hers and her father should not interfere. Moreover, she states that she does not want to marry now and hangs up the call. Next, her bodyguard arrives and asks if Miss Lee is okay. However, she replies that she is not and says she is furious. She mentions that last time, her father tried to marry her off to a fat man, and now he insulted her by suggesting she marry a bald man. Lim Gae-yeon understands the situation and states that not all wealthy families live comfortably. She also says that her boss seems tired and should go home, but Lee says that it is comfortable enough here. However, she apologizes to Lim Gae-yeon, saying that as a bodyguard, she does not have much free time for herself. Lee believes that if she had an S-rank talent, she would have been able to turn the BattleNet upside down. She has the duty to protect the successor of the Reason Guild and needs to hold on until Gae-young takes over the leadership. Soon, Lee believes she will be independent, as she will earn enough money on her own to live by her own rules, not her father's. Lee asks if it is legal to predict who will win and use that as an investment. Gae-yeon replies that yes, but says that it would only be recovering her own investment. Anyway, Lee asserts that she will win this time, and Gae-yeon then asks if she is planning to bet on the next BattleNet tournament. She says that although her boss wants that, she warns that Koreans themselves are betting on Japan's victory. Everyone knows this, even if they don't say it explicitly. Even so, Lee is confident that Korea will win. Soon after, she receives a message from Ji-han and is surprised. However, her astonishment grows when she reads the content of the message. Speaking of the protagonist, he is at a restaurant. As promised, he invited Diego Massid to eat. He enjoyed it very much, as this is his first time trying Korean food. In celebration, Diego asks if Ji-han wants to drink. He replies that yes, and soon drinks are served. The protagonist quickly notices that Diego drinks more than he does, does, and he is also starting to behave differently. Shortly after, Diego begins to open up, saying that he hates the BattleNet system and wishes it didn't exist. He reveals that he stopped making money as a football player, and soon his wife and child abandoned him. For the protagonist, hearing this is surprising, because Diego Massid is known worldwide as a famous football player for the Argentina national team and even won a cup for his country. But he also knows that as soon as the BattleNet appeared, people lost interest in any other sport, and obviously, the popularity of football declined. Thus, a world-renowned football player ended up having to enter the BattleNet to survive. Anyway, Diego wants to get straight to the point, and he asks why the protagonist wants him to become a mage. Jihan explains that Diego's talent consists of using his football player skills and equipment to fight within the BattleNet. Diego confirms this and says that it was the only thing left from his life in football, but on the other hand, his magical skills are terrible. The protagonist then hands him an item. With this, Diego realizes that it is an orb shaped like a football. This orb is made of spider silk, used as a tool by mages. Its main characteristic is its elasticity, and it was crafted by a spider monster. By nature, spiders use their legs, so this item is perfect for Diego. Jihan says that with this, Diego could show his true potential. The protagonist is sure of this statement, as he has seen it happen in his past life. He says that this item is valued at 500,000 BattleNet points, around $5 billion. Astonished, Diego says that there is no way he can pay for something like that, not even if he worked for 10 years for it. However, the protagonist says he is willing to give the item for free, in exchange for an agreement. Curious, Diego asks what he is referring to. Jihan reveals that he is creating his own guild and wants Diego to be a part of it. Diego says that doing something like that requires a lot of money. The protagonist agrees, saying he has enough and is making more at this very moment. He shows his phone to Diego, who is shocked by what he sees. Li Haiyan sees the same, as the message she received from the protagonist earlier was about this. She thinks that if Jihan were in his right mind, this wouldn't make sense. The protagonist sent her the list of his bets in the BattleNet tournament, with 1 win and 3 losses for South Korea, indicating Lee to do the same. However, she thinks Jihan should say something that makes sense and wonders if he really plans to defeat the Sword King. Speaking of which, Ito Ryuhei is already in the arena with his team, facing the opponents representing Korea, his former country. And the most awaited match by everyone is about to begin. When the protagonist showed his bets to Diego, he didn't understand. He said that the Korean team cannot be ignored, but on the other side they have the Sword King, so he doesn't believe that Korea would come in first in the ranking. After all, the Sword King is an absolute and individualistic warrior who practically carries his team. He alone has more power than the entire opposing team. The protagonist knows it's hard to believe, but he also says that one must see to believe. Then he turns on the TV for the match. The international competition between South Korea and Japan is about to begin. The team that wins 3 rounds and best of 5 will be declared the champion. For his part, the Sword King asks his team to follow him. However, the archer says they have no plans to follow Ryuhei, as they do not recognize him as a true member of the team. Ryuhei asks if this is because he was born Korean. The archer says there is a more important reason than that, and claims he does not belong in the position he is in, because this is Seiji's position, a longtime comrade. But since Ryuhei is participating, they had to expel Seiji. He was a victim of injustice. Thus, the entire team does not like having Ryuhei as a teammate and believes he should apologize to Seiji. The Sword King says he may have been misunderstood. However, before he can explain, he is hit by the opponents. Soon, the Japanese team notices that he was struck with a divine punishment. Not even the Korean player himself believes he landed that attack. The team leader says the opponents were fighting among themselves and did not notice the attack approaching. Thus, this is the opportunity to strike. However, the Sword King says the opponents are too noisy, and he pushes them away with an area attack. The archer asks what Ito Ryuhei is doing. He says that if he has to fight with a team that does not follow him, he prefers not to participate in the match. Thus, the Sword King deliberately loses and harms his team. The audience is shocked to see this. Not only them, but Diego as well. He then asks Jihan if he knew this would happen. The protagonist apologizes but claims he cannot reveal what he knows. Besides, he wants to see how this will end. In his thoughts, the protagonist concludes that everything is happening exactly as in his past life. The first time, he thought the outcome of the match was being manipulated due to the high stakes that occurred. But he changed his mind after realizing something. In any case, the Korean team wins the first round, and the MVP of the match went to the Korean Lee Jin-wook. After that, the players returned to the starting point, and the Sword King was reprimanded. The archer says that the Sword King cannot ignore them and asks how a representative of the nation can do something like this. However, Ito Ryuhei says that if the archer does not understand his motives, then he is still immature. He also says that the entire Japanese team acts like amateurs, and now he understands why they always lose to Korea repeatedly. Finally, he says that as long as his team does not accept him, he will do exactly the same thing and will not participate in the matches. Thus, he tells his allies they must choose between having the Sword King on their side or losing shamefully in front of everyone. After hearing this, the archer swallows his pride, realizing that there isn't much he can do. On the other side, the Korean team tries to understand what happened to the Sword King, for they do not know the reason he gave up. However, upon returning to the arena, one of the Koreans notices that the Sword King is different from before, and this time he seems ready to fight. But he asks his team to remain calm, as he still believes he can win. However, just as he finishes speaking with a single blow, the Sword King takes out the entire opposing team, and they are left in shock as they didn't even see where the attack came from. This time, even the protagonist was surprised, despite already knowing the outcomes, for finally, the Sword King entered the fight for real. For his part, Ito Ryuhei does not hold back, and defeats his opponents without any remorse. The Korean audience is in shock, but on the other side, the Japanese celebrate. For the first time, Japan is winning against Korea. With each new round, the Koreans even try to retaliate. However, their strength is not equivalent to that of their opponent. So in the fourth round of the match, the Koreans try to use a different strategy. While one attacks the Sword King, another stays in the rear and tries to trap him. Ito Ryuhei's hands are bound with magic. With this, the Koreans think they might have some advantage, but Ito Ryuhei shows them why he is known as the Sword King. He uses a magical sword instead of physical weapons. With this, he manages to free himself and counterattack the opponents. The Korean mage even tries to retaliate. However, when he least expects it, he is caught off guard. The other Koreans try to counterattack. However, this time, the Sword King is not fighting alone, for his team has finally decided to work with him. Meanwhile, Ito Ryuhei approaches a Korean player and tells him that he hasn't changed at all. In the Korean's view, he sees the Sword King floating towards him and asks his former teammate if he went to Japan just to practice his appearance. Ito Ryuhei regrets hearing this, as he claims his old acquaintance's skills are not as good as his skills in insulting. Then the Korean asserts that he will show what he has been practicing. But when he attacks, he does not inflict any damage on his opponent, and Ito Ryuhei says that now it's his turn to show what he has. He reveals that he has learned a new skill. Soon after, he throws a giant energy sword at his opponent, which not only defeats him, but also destroys a good part of the scenery. This provokes a reaction of shock from the spectators. After all, they are not used to seeing something so grand. In any case, the victory went to the Japanese team, and the Koreans were crushed in front of everyone. Not only that, but the result of the tournament was exactly as the protagonist predicted, and Diego realizes this, yet he is still impressed. Soon he asks how much money the protagonist made from the bets. Ji-han goes to check, but in the meantime, he thinks beyond money, for what he just witnessed is something out of the ordinary and different from what he remembered. The Sword King seems to be stronger than in Ji-han's past life, but he doesn't want to worry about that now. For no matter how much stronger Ito Ryuhei is, Ji-han wants to surpass him and defeat him no matter what happens, and he can't wait for that to happen. If money doesn't matter much to the protagonist, for Lee Hae-yeon, it's the opposite. For as soon as she checks the results of her bet, she sees that she won a lot, and Ji-han's tip worked. Lee Hae-yeon didn't really believe this would work, but now she thanks the tip she received. Thanks to the protagonist, she won 180 million, but in the end, she lost 20 million. She bet 5 million on Ji-han's tip. However, she decided to make her own bet just to be safe, and bet 200 million. So even though she made money according to what Ji-han said, Lee Hae-yeon ended up at a loss for being stubborn and not believing 100% in the protagonist. Speaking of him, Ji-han is still in the meeting with Diego, and asks if he has decided to join his guild. Being honest, Diego states that he doesn't understand why Ji-han wants someone like him on his team. He himself doesn't believe in his potential. However, the protagonist says that Diego witnessed how he perfectly predicted the outcome of the tournament. Thus, he asserts that his decisions are assertive, and he chose Diego believing in his potential. He claims that one day Diego Massid will become the best and most powerful mage that exists. Therefore, this contract he is offering is an investment in the future, where both would come out winning. Diego thinks that since he joined Battle.net, it's the first time someone has said something like that about him. He had forgotten what his past as a soccer player was like. Before, anyone could bet on his future. But since he entered the game, that hasn't happened again until now. However, Ji-han gave him hope. With that, Diego sees no reason not to accept working with him. Diego agrees to join the protagonist's guild, promising to never forget what he is doing for him, and someday he wants to repay him in kind. Satisfied, the protagonist praises the determination of his new ally. At another moment in the game arena, Lim Gae-young is fighting against some players. After all, besides being a bodyguard in the real world, she is also an excellent warrior. Some of the players even recognize her, and they try to team up to defeat her. However, Lim Gae-young says that her opponents do not have the necessary strength for that, and she defeats them effortlessly. With that, she finishes the match in first place. She checks the results and doesn't think it was that bad. But she is not doing this just to get better at the game. Her goal is to become strong enough to be on par with the Sword King, who defeated Korea in the last tournament, or perhaps to reach the same level as Jae-han, who is a promise of becoming an unstoppable legend. Compared to the two, she knows she is far behind. Since she joined the current guild, she has been in a comfort zone, but now she wants to change that, to be able to evolve. At another moment, Seiya sees the news about her father, and that makes her feel very uncomfortable. Her friend notices this and asks if Seiya is okay. Seiya says yes, but her friend knows that's a lie. Kim Hee-soo offers to spend the day with her friend, claiming that it's good to have company around when you're sad. Seiya thanks her friend for accompanying her home, but says she has a commitment with her uncle. Kim Hee-soo asks her friend to let her know if there's anything she can help with. Being honest, Seiya says there is something she would like. However, before she can speak, the car driver brakes suddenly. Irritated, Kim Hee-soo asks why he did that. The driver points to what is in front of him and says that there is something wrong in front of the Sword Palace. Seiya herself doesn't understand as she sees some unfamiliar people in front of her house and gets scared. For his part, the protagonist is testing his skills. He jumps from building to building with great ease, as if he were leaping over common obstacles. After stopping for a moment, he notices that he is getting better and better. From a distance, he sees the tallest building in the city and imagines that the view from its top must be the best. Sometime later, he arrives at the building and thinks that he has only had a view like this in his past life at the American Guild he was part of. Soon, a view like this makes him remember his past. He recalls that before returning, he was looking for Yoon Se-jin, but he never found him in his past life. During the time when half of the nations on Earth had disappeared and the best in the rankings began to gather, Yoon Se-jin, who had always been first as a warrior, suddenly disappeared. The protagonist still doesn't know the reason, but the current Se-jin is as strong as he was at the peak of his past life. Jae-han thinks that he cannot relax just because his growth rate is fast now, because he needs to become much stronger than he was before, becoming the master of the nameless divine arts. Back in front of the Sword Palace, Kim Hee-soo's driver and bodyguard tries to clear some reporters from their path. As he was about to enter the building's parking lot when the journalists surrounded the car, they want to interview the daughter of the Sword King after the result of his last match. However, Seiya does not like this at all. Even so, the reporters insist on getting to her, and Kim Hee-soo, who should be helping her, is enjoying the situation. But when everyone least expected it, Sung Ji-han appears and asks what these reporters are doing. He uses his powers to push everyone away from his niece and tries to go to her in the car. But in the middle of the way, one of the reporters asks if he doesn't care about his image. He replies that yes, and states that this is his gentle way. Therefore, they should be grateful not to see him truly stressed. After that, Jae-han goes to the car and tells his niece to accompany him to his house. With that, Kim Hee-soo says goodbye to her friend and tells the protagonist to take good care of her. However, as the girl and her uncle walk away, Kim Hee-soo tries to disguise her feelings, but she starts laughing at the situation. The reporters present recognize her, as she is famous for being the granddaughter of the CEO of Taewon newspaper. While pretending to be Seiya's friend, Kim Hee-soo is actually hoping for her downfall. In an interview, Edo Ryuhei claims he no longer has a daughter, and all his past before Japan no longer exists. The protagonist watches this and realizes that this is the reason for the reporter's visit. He becomes furious upon hearing those words, but he notices that his niece is quieter than usual. He knows that Seiya was doing well overcoming her loss, but this interview ruined everything. Changing the subject, Seiya asks if her uncle still remembers the Shadow Queen. Ji-han says yes, and then she reveals that she found a clue. On her phone, Seiya shows what she discovered and leaves her uncle quite surprised. Sometime later, the protagonist returned to the game. He showed motivation to destroy all his opponents, but in reality, his attention was focused on the audience area, because that's where the Shadow Queen is, something he wanted to see with his own eyes. The day before, his niece revealed what she had discovered. After investigating thoroughly, Seiya found what was probably what her uncle was looking for. Even without being 100% sure, she believed she had found the first suspect of being the Shadow Queen. Seiya says that previously, they were only looking at the elves sitting on the thrones. But when looking at the shadows, she found this hooded elf. And what caught the girl's attention was the color of this elf's eyes, which is different from the others. The protagonist knows that there are other elves with black eyes, but it is rare for even the normally white parts of the eyes to be filled with black as well. His niece says that's not all. She noticed that this mysterious elf fixed her gaze on a single point throughout the entire footage, and reveals that all the while she was watching her uncle. Se-ah analyzed other match recordings, noticing that whenever present, the elf closely observes the player in first place. So this cannot be a coincidence. The protagonist agrees and finds everything quite suspicious. But there is one last important point. Se-ah highlights the shadow beneath the elf. The image quality isn't very good, so she couldn't determine what it is, but she still found it strange. Ji-han thinks this is definitely something worth checking out. However, he asks if Se-ah found all this by herself. She says yes and used her free time for it. Her uncle thanks her for the help but tells her not to overexert herself next time. He then asks what Se-ah would like to receive as a reward. As he had promised, he says that Se-ah can ask for whatever she wants. The girl's greatest happiness was having helped her uncle. But since he insists, Se-ah thinks about what she will ask for. Back in the present, the protagonist is fighting inside the game. He knows he needs to come in first place to be observed. His desire is to break through the audience barrier. The Colosseum has a barrier built between the stage and the audience. The strength of this barrier is comparable to that of a diamond-level support barrier skill, which works to prevent all attacks and skills from leaving the games. That's why the protagonist can't see the true identity of the Dark Elf. Therefore, he needs to create a gap to see through the barrier. Ji-han imagines that with his new weapon, he will be able to. The Phoenix arrow he obtained from the Emperor. Until now, he hasn't been able to use the full power of the item, as it hasn't been necessary. But to break such a strong barrier, he will need to reach the weapon's full potential. Additionally, he also wants to combine the weapon's strength with the 3 martial talents. Prepared, the protagonist attacks the barrier, because he needs to break through it to see the elf. Immediately, the viewers of his live stream go wild. He continues attacking with all his might. Otherwise, he knows he won't be able to pierce the barrier. Until, after attacking the same spot repeatedly, Ji-han manages to create a gap in the barrier. Immediately, he uses his skill called Wanderer's Eye, because he needs to locate the target before the barrier regenerates. However, the elf notices what the protagonist is doing. She then asks who he is. Ji-han can hear her in his head, but before he could do anything, he is transported to a dark dimension, until a light appears and catches his attention. However, nothing good comes from her, and now he has another problem to solve. Sometime later, the protagonist wakes up in his bed. He feels exhausted and cannot rest properly, because every time he closes his eyes and tries to relax, he remembers the sinister encounter he had with the shadow last time in the game. For him, this was the most terrible thing he witnessed after returning. But on the other hand, the protagonist finds himself imagining the extent of the creature's power that frightened him. Ji-han sees in his system that through the rewards he has collected so far, he has leveled up the achievement shop to level 5. The feature that came with the level increase was the addition of a constellation space. Now he can choose several constellations. However, he thinks it is still too early, and for now he will postpone the purchase, because he wants to add a title space first. Now that he possesses strength, martial power, and a title, he has basically become a silver rank. There was a reason he chose to add another space for a title. It was for the sake of the successor of the martial god that he would soon obtain. Ji-han's martial power will reach 30, and he will gain unnamed divine art. In this process, he will be bound to the martial god and will earn the title of successor to the martial god. It was a title he held until his death in his past life, and now he needs to accept it again, no matter what happens, because he knows very well that soon he will meet him. After a while, the protagonist and his niece go to the center of Gangnam. They are visiting a new apartment, and the person responsible for the property is outlining its features. However, Se-ah can only think that this property is much smaller than her current home. As Se-ah steps out to look around, the protagonist notices his niece's discomfort. He knows that the girl has lived her whole life in the Sword Palace and is not used to a regular apartment. However, he knows that the move was suggested by his niece herself. Previously, the protagonist had asked what Se-ah's wish was, and she wished to move out of the Sword Palace, precisely because the place reminds her of her past, and the memories linked to her father are not doing her any good. Thus, the protagonist committed to helping with the move, and he wants to find a new place soon. But now he says it might be better to choose a place with more space, because Se-ah will soon become a player and she needs an adequate space for her connector. The person in charge praised the protagonist, claiming that the girl is lucky to have such a helpful uncle. Se-ah agrees and says she will always be a fan of her uncle. In fact, the person in charge reveals that he was part of the family of the Sword King, but after his departure to Japan, he immediately gave up. After that, he claims to have been worried about Se-ah when he quit, because he thought it would be difficult for her to deal with all this, but he feels relieved to see the girl doing well. He He also says that she has a long way to go as soon as she awakens, and he is sure that the girl will gain a good gift. Upon hearing this, the protagonist remembers that attention on his niece has increased since the Sword King's first departure to Japan. Moreover, everyone has high expectations to know what gift she will inherit. However, he knows that in his past life, Seiya received a rank F gift, and that left her devastated. Thus, he imagines that he will have to reverse this situation in any way, because people only make things worse, especially reporters. Speaking of which, Kim Hee-soo, the granddaughter of the CEO of one of the largest newspapers in the country, is actively working to harm Seiya, and is basically revealing all the information she knows about the girl. A man hears her doing this and says that Kim Hee-soo is a fake, perfect to inherit her family's media legacy. He even asks if Kim Hee-soo feels any remorse. For her part, she responds that Seiya does not come from a good family, so she is someone disposable. Moreover, Kim Hee-soo's only interest is to help her family no matter what, and she wants to use Seiya for that, as she imagines she can convince her to give an exclusive interview. However, she claims that the biggest problem is the girl's uncle, since they are always together. Then Kim Hee-soo asks if the guy really has confidence that he can defeat Ji-han in battle. He tells Kim Hee-soo not to worry about that. He also tells the girl to keep her promise. Kim Hee-soo says that as soon as her work is done, she will let him do whatever he wants with Seiya. The day of Seiya's awakening has arrived. She is quite anxious about it. To make matters worse, Kim Hee-soo is trying to convince her to give an interview after she receives her gift. Seiya doesn't want to be rude to her friend, yet she refuses to be interviewed. Kim Hee-soo claims that she has been feeling very disappointed lately, stating that she can't stand seeing her friend being criticized because of her father. She says that Seiya is innocent and shouldn't have secrets, then asserts that her grandfather can help with that. Seiya thanks her for the offer but claims she is not interested at the moment. Then she gets up saying she is going to the bathroom. Kim Hee-soo is super irritated that she couldn't convince her. However, she doesn't give up yet and believes that after Seiya's awakening, things might change in her favor. Hee-soo imagines what gift Seiya will receive and hopes it will be something really bad. For her part, Seiya tries to think a little. She already knows about Hee-soo's bad intentions and has been avoiding her since then. Earlier, Seiya was in the bathroom and overheard Hee-soo speaking ill of her. Kim Hee-soo not only spoke badly of Seiya to the other girls, but also mocked her, claiming that without her father, she is nobody. Moreover, Kim Hee-soo considers herself from a noble family and places herself above others. She also says she can hardly wait to see Seiya's face when she receives a bad gift. At that moment, Seiya was in the bathroom and heard everything. Since then, she knows what her supposed friends say about her in her absence. Seiya was shocked for a brief moment, and fear took over her mind, because now that she is in the awakening room, she believes she might actually receive a bad gift. Even so, she hopes Hee-soo is wrong, and she begs the altar to grant her a high-rank gift. In any case, the procedure begins, and Seiya is quite impressed with what she sees. Sometime later, the protagonist waits outside the academy. He is waiting for his niece to come out so he can meet her. Some security guards say that Seiya is still in the room and will be protected by them. One guard says that after recent events, the academy has reinforced its security and now wants to keep curious eyes away, especially from the press. After all, the government itself is paying extra for the enhanced security. The day before, the protagonist had a brief conversation with manager Park Yoon-sik regarding the donation issue from the Sword Palace. Manager Park has a great understanding of the current situation, and he warned that the government provided security to ensure Seiya's safety on the day of her awakening. Because of this, Ji-han is a bit more at ease. Upon arriving at the awakening room, the guard says they have prepared a chair for Ji-han to wait for his niece to come out. Now the guard says he will give privacy to the protagonist, but warns that he can call if he needs anything. Knowing how things ended the first time, Ji-han feels anxious for his niece, and he is there to provide support when she comes out, as he knows the girl will need it. He even bought a gift to try to comfort her. Some time passed, and the protagonist is surprised by a sudden appearance. Kim Hee-soo appears in front of the awakening room with a journalist. The protagonist knows that his niece introduced this girl as a friend, but now he sees that she is accompanied by a reporter, and quickly understands their intentions. Ji-han asks how they managed to bypass the security blockade. Kim Hee-soo says that the media has its connections. He then asks if the girl isn't even going to disguise the fact that she sneaked in here. However, Kim Hee-soo says she studies there too, so she has the right to walk these halls. Ji-han tells her to leave, as his niece is going straight home after she comes out and won't talk to anyone else. However, Kim Hee-soo claims she won't leave until she gets her interview. In that, the protagonist asserts that he won't just stand by and watch Kim Hee-soo do what she wants with his niece. Kim Hee-soo then asks if he is threatening her, and says that if that's the case, instead of fighting her, Jae-han will have to face a level 50 warrior. Meanwhile, inside the room, Seo kneels after awakening a rank F gift, which she feared the most. She can't believe this actually happened and thinks it means her end. Outside, her uncle was cowardly attacked, and now he will have another problem to solve. After attacking the protagonist from behind, the man says he can't wait to get his reward. Jae-han, with blood in his eyes, asks what this man's intentions are with his niece. For his part, the enemy is impressed that Jae-han is still standing, even after taking such a strong hit. The protagonist retaliated with a punch immediately. However, he realizes that the enemy is wearing skin coated in stone. With that, the enemy notices the protagonist's surprise and asks where all his previous confidence has gone. Seeing the two fight, Kim Hee-soo feels happy, because everything is going according to her plan. For his part, the enemy says that the protagonist thinks too highly of himself just because he recently became a superstar. He attacks and says that when he asks something, he expects an answer. However, the protagonist hits him on the chin with his mouth open, which causes significant damage to the enemy, making Kim Hee-soo realize that her friend is not unbeatable. Jae-han uses his powers to lift the enemy high by his hair, and says that he acts just like a bully in high school, but he will leave a mark on him so he never does that again. Quickly, the reporter runs away, leaving Kim Hee-soo behind. She realizes that her assistant has failed to defeat the protagonist, and fears thinking that she might be next. Inside the room, Seo is still in disbelief, but for a moment she thinks she shouldn't cry, because now is not the time for that. Besides, her uncle is waiting outside. On the way, Seo thinks that even being active as a player, a better gift wouldn't make her feel less afraid, so she shouldn't be so bothered. Even so, she feels like an idiot for praying all this time. However, upon leaving the room, she has a surprise. Her uncle is pulling someone's hair out, and she asks what is happening. However, she soon sees Kim Hee-soo in front of her, upset about what the protagonist did. Kim Hee-soo claims that her grandfather is a powerful man, but Jae-han insists he doesn't care about that. Not backing down, Kim Hee-soo claims she can fabricate false news about him and his niece, and using the power of the press, she can turn the whole world against them. Moreover, the public opinion about the Sword King is already not very good, and she could start from there. However, Jae-han tells Kim Hee-soo to give it her best shot. He could leave Korea with his niece if necessary, but he asks if Kim Hee-soo would be able to bear the burden of the acts she committed. Kim Hee-soo says that if it comes to that, Jae-han would never be able to hold her responsible for any harm caused to him or his niece. But the protagonist asserts that he could. He says that Kim Hee-soo is someone who would never regret her cruel actions, so he will make sure to leave a mark on her of what would happen if she tried something against him or his family again. After that, Seo goes to the car with her uncle and asks if everything is okay. She says that Hee-soo deserved to pay for her actions, but she thought the punishment was too harsh, especially since she belongs to a powerful family. The protagonist reassures his niece, saying that she has nothing to worry about because he knew what he was doing from the start. But now he wants to talk about her gift. Seo says she received a late start, a rank F gift, and believes it is no longer possible for her to become a player. With that, the protagonist shows his status window to his niece, claiming it is the first time he reveals this to someone. The girl realizes that her uncle's gift is also rank F, but she doesn't understand how he is so strong nonetheless. Jae-han says he has strength through martial powers. Most people do not know this strength because the conditions to obtain it are hidden. He asserts that the gift is not a determining factor in making someone a player, as there are unique statistics that can be obtained upon giving his present to his niece. The protagonist says that this item will show her which path she should follow. Before returning, there was a woman who was the second strongest player in the world, the Chinese Jin Yuhua. She had the same gift that Seo just received. Even so, she was so strong that people couldn't believe their own eyes when watching her fights. In Seo's case, she received her gift and couldn't survive. However, there was a hidden secret in that, and now with the item she received from her uncle, she is able to realize that it is possible to upgrade her gift. The protagonist realizes that the item met expectations. This item is called Hermes Monocle, and it can be used to see the true nature of your gifts. Before his niece's birthday, the protagonist had prepared the item, as he already knew what was going to happen. He tells Seo that she can use this knowledge to evolve her gift, and with the right training, she could be more efficient than most people. Not only that, but Jae-han claims that she can quickly achieve a rare status gain, which he mentioned before. With that, he asserts that his niece has the potential to become the strongest player someday. Seo is moved to hear this, for until now she believed she had received a bad gift, but now she realizes she was mistaken. Her uncle encourages her, as he does not want to see Seo lose hope. He knows that his niece was abandoned and heard from her own father that he no longer has a connection with her. Moreover, she was betrayed by her school friend, and the media is paying attention to every step she takes. However, now she does not want to be known as the daughter of the Sword King, but rather as the player named Yoon Se-ah. The protagonist is aware of all the emotional burden she has been carrying all this time, and he says that sometimes it is hard to hold it in, so he tells her she can cry as much as she wants now. Se-ah says that she has cried enough for today. She says her uncle is becoming more and more fascinating, and it even seems like he can predict the future. However, Jahan claims that he is just lucky. Changing the subject, Se-ah says she is very hungry. The protagonist then says he will prepare something. After all, he promised that next time he would make a homemade meal. Hearing this makes Se-ah more excited. However, unlike her, Kim Hee-soo is not happy at all. She insults the protagonist with every name for having pulled her hair out. Then her bodyguard appears, but Kim Hee-soo says he should knock before entering. The bodyguard apologizes but claims he has the video she requested. Kim Hee-soo is still furious and wants revenge for what happened, until she sees the video and gives a wicked smile, because the video is from the security camera at the gym at the moment when Se-ah saw her gift for the first time. And from her facial expression, Hee-soo imagines that the gift received was not one of the best. As she believed, Hee-soo imagines that Se-ah received a rank F gift, otherwise there would be no reason for her to be so sad. Now she thinks she can use this video to harm Se-ah and can't wait to get her revenge. But forgetting her for a moment, the story cuts to BJ Golden Light. He has been spending empty days feeling powerless after not being selected by the one he desired so much. BJ believes that the ugly and unpleasant flame wizard and those filthy and repugnant eagles took his focus away. But believing that he dealt with everyone who bothered the protagonist, he concluded that he is doomed to become his manager. Speaking of the protagonist, he has returned to the game, and he is using his newly acquired weapon to destroy some zombies. As he defeats the monsters with ease, the players on his team are watching everything from the sidelines. Jahan is handling the situation so easily that his teammates have nothing to do but watch. With that, he again finishes the match in first place. Soon after, his system alerts him that he is eligible to participate in the Silver League, as he has completely mastered the Bronze League. Jahan is among the top 100 in the Bronze League. This means he is not only among the best in Korea, but also in the entire world. That is why he was promoted to the Silver League, as he has become strong enough for it. However, only one of the selected will be promoted. The battle for promotion is a survival game and only ends when there is only one person left, so only the first place will go to the Silver League, a phase that determines who will come in first place. The protagonist sees the list of participants and, as expected, an old acquaintance will also participate this time. Baron Williams, his former boss in his past life, is now just a top 100, but he is the first rank from the United States. Jahan did not imagine he would encounter Baron again so soon. He thinks he will not lose, but he knows he never defeated Baron in his past life. The decisive factor that led the protagonist to the top 100 was the union of force. He also has martial power, but the nameless divine art is nothing more than strength, endurance, and speed combined. It does not compare to strength, which is a power that transcends reality, like absolute territory, mana reinforcement, and telekinesis. Even so, there are different weight classes. The power of strength that the Baron used in his past life was on a different level. Strength is a statistic proportional to mana and divine power. The Baron was born with great mana, so his strength is at least double that of the protagonist. Jahan may have precise control, but that means nothing in the face of absolute power. The Baron reached first place in the ranking solely with his power. That's why the protagonist believes he will have to work hard to defeat him. He knows that Baron did not maintain first place by pure luck, as he was famous for his Diamond-level mana since he was bronze. Fighting him head-on would be an act of suicide, so the protagonist wants to unlock the unnamed divine art before that. Looking at a current photo of Baron, Jahan realizes that he is different. After all, in his past life, he had a very different appearance from now. Jahan speculates that perhaps Baron has matured by becoming a guild master. Then he receives a call from Lee Hae-yeon. Curious about what it's about, he answers. On the other end, Lee Hae-yeon asks if the protagonist can tell her who she should choose again. However, Jahan is unsure about what the woman is talking about. Speaking of her, Lee Hae-yeon is at her guild's headquarters and is startled by the sudden appearance of her bodyguard. Ga-young says she is there to accompany her boss to her appointment. Lee Hae-yeon had forgotten and asks for 5 minutes before leaving. She reveals that she asked Ji-han for some tips and is waiting for him to respond, as she wants to recover the lost money. As her bodyguard must already know, Jahan is in the global top 100 of the bronze rank. Not only him, but also Baron from the USA. Ji-han told Lee Hae-yeon that he would be in first place, and she even thinks it makes sense. but she is a bit hesitant. For her part, Gae-young says that Jae-han is conceited for thinking he could win against someone like Baron. Lee then asks if she agrees that betting on Baron is the right choice to make. She was a bit shaken because Jae-han accurately predicted the betting results for the Japan-Korea match, but still thinks she should bet on Baron. For some reason, Gae-young wanted to disagree but remains silent. Her boss then asks how her score is on BattleNet. After all, her bodyguard has worked hard to level up recently. Gae-young even wanted to tell her boss, but she preferred to withhold the information for now. Back to the protagonist, he checks his status after training and realizes that all the conditions have been met, so now he should be able to get what he desires. After that, he concentrates and activates the eyes of the Wanderer again. With that, he sees the constellation Wandering, the martial god. The protagonist's feeling now is the same as when he performed this procedure for the first time. Then the deity says it's good to see Ji-han again. Ji-han obtains the unnamed divine art and thinks that in his past life, he also received a lot of help from this same deity. Normally, deities only grant something like this in exchange for some kind of agreement or payment. However, the martial god never demanded anything from him. He simply granted him his power without asking for anything in return. But suddenly, something strange happens. The connection with the deity is cut off, and the protagonist's system reveals that the deity is cautious of him. Because his 3 gates are already open, Jae-han doesn't understand, as this was never a problem in the past. His system informs him that the divine art has been cancelled, and the deity expelled him from its realm. Soon after, he returns to his reality. Not only that, but he looks at his status and sees that he is close to the promotional competition of the top 100. He not only lost the opportunity to possess the unnamed divine art, but his gift disappeared, precisely his most important aspect. Sometime later, he meets his niece. After awakening, his niece decided to leave the academy. Many students who do not meet the academy's requirements end up leaving after awakening a low-rank gift. However, Sei-ai did not give up and started training on her own, with her uncle's help. Jae-han is not very worried about her. After all, his niece has been doing well since then. His biggest concerns are with himself. The competition for qualification for the Silver League is the next day, and he still hasn't resolved his issues. This wouldn't be a big problem under normal circumstances, but in a competition like this, it is essential that he is as strong as possible. Until Seiya realizes that something is bothering him and asks if it's related to the promotion of the top 100. The protagonist says yes, but spares his niece the details, as he doesn't want her to worry about his problems. In any case, Seiya says that her uncle will win. After all, he always finds a way to solve any problem. Seiya is so carefree that she considers betting high on her uncle's victory, but he tells his niece not to do that. After all, she is a minor and shouldn't get involved with gambling. She thinks this excuse is kind of ridiculous, but nonetheless decides to obey him. Amidst this, the protagonist feels something different and wonders what just happened. At dusk, the protagonist goes to a park. He notices that his left eye feels a bit strange, but doesn't know why. After all, he has never experienced this before. Ji-han tries to slowly approach this sensation, using his strength to pinpoint its exact location, to then get rid of it immediately. However, in the process, he ends up hurting himself. Aside from the pain the protagonist felt, he received a system alert saying that the trace of the wandering divinity within him has been eliminated. With that, he completed the domination over the constellation. Ji-han didn't quite understand what that meant. His system informs him that now he can receive sponsorship from another constellation, but Ji-han thought it was possible to do that before. In any case, he knows that the system never lies, which means that the divine art was in his way all this time. Ji-han thought that divinity was like a generous tree, but concluded it was more like a parasite. However, his system reveals that the martial divinity is even more cautious with him. The protagonist is super confused by this. He thinks that even in his second life, there are still many questions he doesn't know how to answer, besides the fact that he still can't use the powers he wanted. However, he thinks this is an opportunity to seek sponsorship from another constellation. To make things better, his system just informed him that an epic mission is available. The player must go to the Colosseum map, the same one where the Shadow Queen is always present. Ji-han thinks that even if he manages to get sponsorship from the Shadow Queen, he would still need something to use in the competition, something that is worthy of the unnamed divine art. In any case, he heads to the promotional round. Among various players, once again, the protagonist will have to prove his potential. Only this time, he doesn't want to fight anyone individually, and says that everyone can attack him at once. After all, the protagonist intends to be as quick as possible. In any case, the players attack him. They use both magic and melee attacks, but the protagonist is not caught off guard. After dodging a magical attack, he heads towards the wizard who cast it. The wizard sees the protagonist unarmed and thinks he has an advantage over him. However, that was a big mistake on his part. Ji-han fights against the opponents and finds them all the same, until suddenly he sees a blade very close to his face. and barely avoids being seriously injured. Not only that, but his surprise increases when he sees that the one who attacked him was none other than Lim Gae-young. However, the protagonist doesn't understand why she is in this match. After the Space League began, people started to get used to the fact that dying in the game meant dying in real life as well. When the final of the Asian Northeast League started, the Japanese representative in the final was, of course, the Sword King Ito Ryuhei. At that time, there was no one in South Korea capable of fighting fairly against Ito Ryuhei. Fearing death, South Korean rankers avoided fighting him. The person who opposed the Sword King as the representative of Korea was the successor candidate of the Sword King. This person was none other than the Plum Blossom Sword, Lim Gae-young. However, the protagonist knows that she was never one of the top 100 in the league, and seeing her there makes his surprise even greater, as it means the future has changed. In any case, Ji-han ends up fighting against her, and uses his lightning powers to push the opponent away. After that, he grabs his weapon and attacks with all his strength, but Gae-young manages to dodge in time. The protagonist wonders if she has always been this strong, and imagines that she might be hiding her powers. However, he realizes that she is stronger than the last time they met in the game. Besides, she is no longer using unnecessary attacks, and her feet are much more agile. The fact that Gae-young is much stronger. Does the protagonist wonder what happened to her during this time? Once Lee Hae-yeon had asked her bodyguard how her status was. Gae-young, although hesitant, informed that she was in the global top 100 of the Bronze League, and that she had reached level 25 as she started to put in effort after meeting Ji-han. Her boss asked why she hadn't shared this good news earlier. Gae-young replied that she needed a favor. She wanted new battle equipment, because after using her current sword so much, her hands could no longer handle it, as it is very heavy. Therefore, she needs a lighter sword, and she hadn't mentioned anything before because her current sword was a gift from her boss. However, Lee Hae-yeon called her crazy, and said that if the sword had been bothering her all this time, she shouldn't have kept it. Lee Hae-yeon said she would take care of it immediately, but Gae-yeon asked if that wouldn't be a problem, given her boss's recent financial losses. Irritated, Lee Hae-yeon said she had enough money to handle it, and that it wouldn't take long to get the new equipment. But Hae-yeon told Gae-young to show everyone everything she has during the promotion round, and that she could defeat Ji-han if necessary. To Lee, no matter what they say, Gae-young has always been the rising star of the Bronze League in Korea. She just needs to prove her worth to others. For her part, Gae-young enjoyed being genuinely praised by Miss Lee and being compared as an equal to Ji-han. This served as motivation for her. However, when facing Ji-han, Gae-young thinks she won't be able to meet her boss's expectations, because she believes she is still not strong enough to defeat him. The protagonist has the advantage and knows it. He knows that even if he doesn't believe he can win, his opponent won't simply give up. For her, it's enough to survive as long as she can and keep attacking whenever she has an opening. It was the same in the Northeast Asian Finals in the protagonist's past life. For her part, Gae-young says she knows she is strong enough to defeat him now, and maybe she will never be able to defeat him in her life, but she claims that if she gives up, everything will be over. So if she wants to surpass him someday, she will have to give her best at all times. Ji-han thinks this is the kind of person Gae-young has always been, a player who can keep fighting to improve, even knowing she cannot defeat her rival. In his past life, the Sword King defeated her with his dual blades, but in this life, Lim Gae-young is in the top 100. Now Ji-han is curious to know how much his regression will change the future. He always thinks about this and now more than ever wants to know. Because if Lim Gae-young's future has changed, the other people he knows might also have a different future. Thus, the protagonist wants Gae-young as an ally, but for that he will need to defeat her first. The protagonist realizes that his opponent's attack is not synergistic with a spear, but there is a perfect skill for this type of situation, which consists of the 3 martial devotional calamities of the earth, called Fury 1,000 times greater. On the other side of the world, Clark Jr., an American warrior, encounters Baron Williams, and says that they have finally met. He also says that the world must be coming to an end for them to think that the coward who is always giving buffs from behind is the most promising prospect available. For his part, Baron scoffs at this comment with a yawn. He says that Clark shouldn't complain so much, and tells him to stop the small talk and get right to it. Baron Williams is a war-hungry madman, and he is always looking for a fight. It doesn't matter who it is with, not even if it's with an ally from his own country. Some try to team up to defeat him. However, Baron doesn't even see them as players, because he always calls them a swarm of ants, and he sees himself as a cannon that destroys everything it attacks. Thus, for him, it's not enough to defeat his opponents. He also aims to humiliate them. But now, he is in the same arena as Ji-han and Gae-young, and he has started to become aware of the protagonist, just like what happened in Ji-han's past life. Then Baron approaches the protagonist, and tries to call him by name. However, Baron mispronounces it, and Jahan warns him that he said something with double meaning. Baron apologizes, saying he doesn't speak many languages well besides English. After that, he attacks the protagonist, who relies on his understanding. However, the attack did not have the effect that Baron expected. Jahan uses his speed to move to the enemy's rear, but when he attacks him, Baron manages to dodge. After that, he flies high and prepares to attack. Jahan already knows the tricks of his former boss. Even so, he is facing a strong opponent, and no matter how hard he tries, he cannot hit Baron. Not only that, but he also becomes vulnerable to counterattacks. Baron says he will show all the insects the ultimate end of their lives within the game. After that, he launches an attack so strong that it covers practically the entire arena, hitting everyone below. In this way, he celebrates his victory, thinking there is no way anyone could have survived this. However, he is surprised when he sees something. The protagonist launches an attack that ends up eliminating several opponents. He thanks Baron, claiming that thanks to him, he got some kills for free. With that, Jahan is in first place so far. For his part, Baron thinks about how Jahan survived his attack, as his fire mixed with the force had never been surpassed before. But upon looking closely, he realizes that the flames did not touch Jahan. Surprised, he notices that the protagonist knows how to manipulate the force as well. Baron becomes furious, as he had believed himself to be the only one who could do this, and does not understand how someone discovered his secret technique. Jahan provokes Baron, claiming that he is not special, and says that the fact that his technique can be copied demonstrates how bad it is. This only increases Baron's rage. He says that no insect can insult him and get away unscathed, and he promises to burn Jahan to prove that his statement is wrong. For his part, the protagonist says he will not let him do that, and will demonstrate what he has been preparing for some time. A flashback shows that once, the protagonist was seeking another constellation that could sponsor him, as he needed something to replace the unnamed divine art, until he remembered the crystal fragment he had saved, which could only be used once, so he had not used it. But now is the perfect opportunity to use such an item, and back in the present, the protagonist is blessed by the crystal. With that, his power increased by 50%, and he believes he will finally give Baron Williams what he deserves. In his country, Baron is considered a coward. He was not as muscular or tall as the others, and he was shy, a player afraid of battles. Others talked about Baron, saying he was a waste of talent. He had 2 status windows in 2 classes, and if he used that to his advantage, he could dominate the battle.net. But Baron chose support and mage, meaning he would be at the back of the group. However, Baron changed when he gained strength. He began to dominate the field with the help of the mana he possessed, and countless rising stars fell before him. Players who fought against him said that Baron had 2 disasters in the palm of his hands. His wave of fire allows him to sweep through all enemies at once with a tsunami of flames, and no one has survived to this day after being hit by that ability. That is why he has this excess of confidence. But unlike before, Baron had never faced an opponent like Jahan. The protagonist executed an attack that pierced through the opponent's magic, something Baron didn't even know was possible. For his part, Jahan thinks that Baron is strong on the outside but has nothing on the inside, and says that he is too busy trying to hide his lack of skills instead of compensating for them. Moreover, Baron has no precision whatsoever. After being struck, Baron says that the protagonist speaks as if he already knows him. Jahan claims he knows someone very similar. He also says that it doesn't matter how much Baron pretends to be strong, and acts as if he is full of confidence, because he cannot hide the feeling of inferiority, and that guilt consciousness that has deeply rooted itself in his heart. Building muscles, changing his appearance, and using all these sophisticated skills are all just to cope with the situation. Jahan asserts that there is no sense in any of this as long as he doesn't change his essence. Baron says he does not appreciate all this arrogance, but Jahan says he can say the same about him. But now he wants to stop talking and finish this quickly. The protagonist then attacks in an attempt to end the fight. However, to his surprise, Baron uses a different skill to counterattack, and hits him with a lightning bolt, sending Jahan flying away. Baron calls this the second disaster, named Lightning. Unlike the Wave of Fire, which is a long-range mana attack, Lightning is a high-level skill that concentrates mana to pierce the opponent. It was a perfect skill for Baron, as it emphasizes the amount of power over precise control. However, even after being hit, he realizes that Jahan is still standing. He notices that Jahan used his weapon to minimize the effect of the attack, and he says that he has a very quick reflex. Moreover, Jahan executed a perfect block. However, he claims that the protagonist cannot block the same attack twice, so he prepares to shoot again, and he asserts that this time his attack will be lethal. The players still in the arena conclude that the protagonist will not be able to escape this. However, he does not intend to lose and believes he will win with the help of the Queen of Shadows. After all, she is watching him. Jaehan knows that the queen always looks at the winner of the arena. With that, he assumes his attack stance. Baron arts to shoot his lightning once again. The phoenix arrow from the protagonist hits him. The shot was so fast that Baron did not see it coming. Jaehan did not hesitate, even knowing that the phoenix arrow would disappear after being used 5 times. This is because the phoenix arrow was not aimed at Baron, but at the Queen of Shadows. With that, for the first time in BattleNet history, the Colosseum barrier was shattered. It doesn't take long for the news to circulate that the promising player Jaehan defeated the all-powerful Baron Williams. Seeing this, Lee Haeyeon goes into despair as once again out of stubbornness, she bet on Baron's victory. She says that this makes no sense, and in this way, she will lose all her money. Gayoung approaches and says that her boss really did not believe she would win. She claims she already knew that, but is still disappointed. Lee Haeyeon tells her bodyguard not to be upset, but states that she basically lost the moment the fight started. She also says that to bet on her, Gayoung needs to go much further. However, she notices that her bodyguard seems to be in a good mood. Gayoung says that even having lost, she learned something from this fight, and she is willing to keep improving. Lee says she will cheer for her, but now she notices that something is happening. Gayoung asks if she is still betting. However, both are shocked by what they see. In the United States, Baron is still irritated by the defeat, but notices that Jaehan was not aiming at him. After destroying the arena barrier, the protagonist collects his weapon and says that it has been a while since the last time he met the Queen of Shadows. After being hit, the queen's corporeal form dissolves, and she assumes the shadowy form that gave chills to the protagonist the first time. The shadow takes control of everything and even cuts the transmission signal of the match. With that, Seaa, who was watching her uncle, becomes worried about him. Amid all the darkness, the protagonist notices that it is cold and the air is heavy, making it increasingly difficult to breathe. He knows that the queen is watching him and realizes that while he is inside the shadows, his system does not work. Therefore, he does not know if he has completed the mission assigned to him or not. So his only alternative is to try to attack the shadow again. However, this time, the shadow is absorbing all the light emitted from his attack. Unlike the first time, the protagonist's attack did not have the expected effect. He notices a shadow approaching and attacks it, but he realizes that nothing happened. After all, it is just a shadow and not something physical. However, these shadows are spreading everywhere, and they are attacking some remaining players. The protagonist also becomes a target. Knowing that physical attacks will not work, he tries to attack in another way and uses his divine magic. There was no direct damage, but Jaehan noticed that a bit of the shadow was erased, concluding that this shadow is weak to light. Then, one shadow tries to hold his foot, while another comes towards him and tries to attack him. But at that moment, the protagonist remembers the first time he used his lightning speed. All the zombies that were nearby ended up being pulverized. In that, he thinks of trying to do the same thing now. And then he invokes all the energy to his feet. In that, he notices that the shadows are no longer approaching because of the light, so it will be easy to defeat them. But just when he thought his victory was guaranteed, he sees a giant shadow trying to attack him from above. Realizing that his plan will not be so easy to execute, Connector, this is a necessary equipment to participate in BattleNet, as it has the effect of reducing the pain felt during the game, since amputations, burns, and other injuries are common in BattleNet, making the BattleNet connector a necessity rather than an option. The recommended model reduces pain by 80%. Most of the best players use a model that reduces pain by 90%. This allows them to play more boldly. After all, it almost completely eliminates the fear of pain. However, the protagonist does not use a connector to play, and the reason is quite simple. He knows that BattleNet will cease to be just a game in the future, and when that happens, there will be no connectors to reduce pain, as the game will become real life and vice versa. That's why Jaehan fights as if the situation were real all the time, and always imagines that his life is at risk, as he has gotten used to fighting this way. Every time fire burns his skin or even high-voltage lightning strikes him, he feels everything, as he is not protected by technological equipment. And the current moment is no different. The danger of a 10-meter sword hitting him is completely real. Knowing this, Jaehan feels anxious, as although it won't kill him, it will cause immense pain. The other players present there do not understand what is before their eyes. They only know that Jaehan is involved in this in some way. For his part, the protagonist is starting to get tired of dodging so much. He thinks this fight is unfair. After all, the opponent is 10 times his size. Thus, he imagines that if he is hit just once, it will be his end. Moreover, the Queen of Shadows is not the only one after him. The attack against Baron earlier attracted all the other players' attention to Jaehan, and now they are waiting for the right opportunity to attack him. Therefore, he cannot let his guard down for even a second. Thus, he sees no other alternative but to appeal to the power of the Force. Combined with the Force, he also carries a magical attack, and he tries to burn everything around him. Jaehan says that if the Queen tries to cover him with her shadow, he will cause a calamity with fire from the heavens to combat her. This leaves the other players quite scared, as they realize that the protagonist is strong enough to eliminate the entire shadow with a fire spell. Jahan not only illuminated the skies, but also caused a huge explosion in the middle of the arena to keep the fire burning longer. After that, he looks around and tries to find the other players. However, when he looks, they are already running away. However, Jahan does not have time to chase after them, as he sees that the Queen of Shadows is still there. Then she creates a dark circle around the protagonist. The protagonist is starting to get a bit tired of this. He thinks this won't end while the Queen's original body is well. To prevent this, he thinks he is capable of a higher level of martial arts, as if he could use the martial devotion of the three calamities without the nameless divine arts. Jahan knows it won't be perfect considering the level he is at now, but he can use the power of the Phoenix arrows. The fire of a phoenix that is activated when launching the Phoenix arrow is capable of compensating for the lack of strength. Long ago, lightning was interpreted as divine wrath, a type of punishment that an enraged god brings upon humanity. But the protagonist believes that when the world is filled with darkness and chaos, light emerges. In this way, he intends to end the darkness around him. His system alerts him that he is beyond his capabilities and his life is in danger. Even so, the protagonist invokes divine light combined with martial arts and uses all this power combined with the Phoenix arrow, believing that this way he will purify the scene and expel the demons present. Thus, aiming at the source of the problem, he releases the arrow. Technique of the divine lightning flash. This technique was on a completely different level from martial arts, compensating for the lack of strength with the use of the Phoenix arrow. Jahan managed to incorporate another supernatural ability, at least 80% of it, as originally, the lightning flash is a fusion of countless lightning bolts into one. However, Jahan's lightning could not stabilize into one and was not as fast as the Phoenix arrow, and the technique he used ended up being incomplete. Even so, he managed to hit the Queen of Shadows, and for a brief moment, her face was exposed to the light. The arrow shot by the protagonist almost hit her, but it was interrupted before reaching the target. At first, the protagonist believed he only managed to reveal the face of the Queen of Shadows, and was not able to hurt her even a little. But with a closer look, he could see that he caused a small scratch on her, which although small was enough to make her angry. And the satisfied protagonist, for at least he wounded her. He knows that he also had a bit of luck on his side. Because of this, he managed to get the opening he needed. Jahan didn't think that his lack of proficiency in this skill would help him this way, but now he wants to execute his final attack. He wonders if this was provocative enough. Apparently yes, as his system alerts him that he has completed the mission of provoking the Queen of Shadows. However, the protagonist is surprised by her reaction, yet it doesn't take long for the Queen of Shadows to retaliate. With that, the protagonist is forced to defend himself. However, since he exerted too much effort in the last attack, he can't hold his hand steady enough, as it is quite injured. Even so, he continues to be attacked, and he needs to defend himself, otherwise his effort will be in vain. Meanwhile, he notices that the other players have been captured. Jahan finds it strange that the Queen of Shadows is still keeping them alive, and he wonders what she is planning. As he gets lost in thought, the shadow tries to grab his legs again. Thus he realizes that the Queen's plan is to defeat him first and leave the others for last. Seeing the giant sword coming toward him again, Jahan tries to use his lightning speed to escape the trap, but that doesn't quite work out. However, as the sword approaches, he notices that the attack is slower than before. Then he realizes that the Queen wants to toy with him a bit before finishing off her prey. Not only that, but if he is defeated before the other players, he will lose his ranking for the Silver League. So he tries to think of a way to have the others defeated first. Jahan thinks that he can't move his body, but his fingers are free. So he tries to use his power to attack the others before being hit himself.
Our video ends here. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, bye bye.